Hello and welcome to yet another video. This is the 16th episode in which, rather than Hinata's father, a young Uzumaki Naruto foils Kumo's kidnapping attempt. However, he receives a severe wound in the process, jeopardizing his shinobi career. That is, if not for a certain fox stepping in and offering Naruto the Hokage to be a reward for his heroism. Witness Naruto's newfound power and unique perspective. This story comes from Story Seeker 7. Make certain to support him, her. Please like and subscribe to show your support. Let's get the show started. To Zuna's home, the time had finally come. 1 week after they had come to Wave. 1 week after the battle with Zabuza. 1 week that Gato had left to live. Naruto could feel the anticipation in the air. Is everything ready? Shisui asked. He looked over his genin. The members of Team 11 were busy inspecting their gear and going over the plan. Naruto nodded. I got everything I need, he said. His eyes were also in position, keeping a watch on Gato and for anything else that could happen. What about the storage scroll? Shisui asked him. Remember, we'll need his head as proof of the deed. Naruto nodded. I know that, he said. It should be able to keep the little bastard's head fresh and clean. Well, as fresh and clean as one could get with a man like Gato. Good, Shisui said. Then he looked around at his genin. So, do you think you all be able to do it? Kill a man like Gato in cold blood. In particular, he was looking at Hinata. If everything went according to plan, she would be the one to take Gato's life. Hinata looked at the floor nervously. I think so, she said. Then she looked around at her teammates. Naruto and Sasuke both gave her comforting nods. A determined expression flashed across her face, and she looked back at Shisui. I will, she affirmed. Shisui had a smile on his face, but Naruto could tell that it was strained. All right then, he said. Naruto and Sasuke, do you remember your parts? Both boys nodded. I'll stay outside the hideout and keep an eye on things, Naruto said. But mostly to make sure that Zabuza and Haku are busy fighting Kurenai-sensei and her team. While I go in with you guys, Sasuke said. And keep a lookout while Hinata deals with Gato. If someone tries to come in before you finish, I'll have to deal with them. Shisui nodded. Good, he said. Then, a frown appeared on his face. Look, guys, I know this will be tough on you. Gato might be a slime ball, but still being asked to kill the guy. A frown appeared on Sasuke's face. So what? Sasuke said. How is it any different from when you asked us to kill those bandits? Naruto already had an idea what the answer was. Because they got to go down fighting, he said. They had weapons in their hands when we killed them, and they could fight back. Gato is just a pathetic little man we're being asked to kill. If given the chance, he'll run away or beg for his life. Shisui nodded. That's right, he said. The bandits, however slim of a chance it was, they had a fighting chance. Gato, on the other hand, won't be given that luxury. In fact, if all goes well, he won't even have a chance to register that he's in danger. Shisui crossed his arms. That's a little bit different from killing someone in a fight, he said after a moment, letting the genin think. If you have any doubts, I can do this mission myself if you like. I won't push the three of you when you're not ready, not again. Now the genin understood where their sensei's concern was coming from. We'll do it, Sasuke said, stepping up to face Shisui. We can't run from stuff like this forever. Naruto nodded and turned his head to face Shisui. You told us that Team 11 will be a deep strike team, he said. So, that means we'll be doing a lot of this stuff. Not just taking out bases or enemy formations. We'll be expected to assassinate more guys like Gato. We have due to this, Hinata added. We're Shinobi, which means we won't always get pretty missions. But they still have to be done. Naruto nodded at Hinata and faced Shisui. We're happy you're so concerned for us, Shisui-sensei, he said. Naruto saw the others around him nodding. It makes you a good sensei to us and a good guy period. We'll complete this mission and any other the old man can throw at us. Is that right, guys? Hi, Sasuke said. Hi, Hinata said. Shisui looked at them with a hard stare for several moments in silence. Then, a wry smile spread across his face. All right then, he said. Then let's get to it. Let's get downstairs and meet up with the others. Hi, sensei, the three genin said together. A moment later, they were downstairs and gathered with the rest of the Konohanin. Bridge Shino could feel the anticipation in the air, and it was almost as thick as the mist hanging in the air. Shino might not have shown it, but he was very nervous about what would come. Yet, simultaneously, he was excited that he would soon get a chance to test himself against an opposing shinobi. Even his Kyaku buzzed excitedly, something that only an Aburame could notice. Outwardly, he maintained the stoic attitude that his clan was famous for. His teammate, on the other hand, displayed the Inuzuka brashness. I still can't believe that Naruto and his team bailed on us, he said with a scoff. Shino pushed his glasses up and glanced at the Inuzuka boy. They did not bail on us, he said. They are simply scouting the area to ensure that Zabuza or Gato do not pull any deceptions on us. Kiba scoffed and rolled his eyes. Yeah, right, he said. I think they're just chickening out of a good fight. Team 11 is providing us an invaluable service, Shino argued. If Gato were to make a move on the bridge or the nearby town, we would not know until it was too late. Likewise, if Zabuza has any hidden plans, they may be able to uncover it and warn us. In truth, Shino suspected that more was going on, but he could not ascertain what. Yeah, well, whatever, Kiba said. Just means we'll get all the glory when taking Zabuza and his lackey out. You mean when I take Zabuza out, Kurenai said with a smile. Kiba flinched back and rubbed the back of his head. Kurenai-sensei, he said nervously. You know what I meant. Shino shook his head, and he could hear Akamaru letting a disappointed bark. Kurenai chuckled and looked back at the road. Don't worry, Kiba, she said. You get plenty of a chance to show off. Alright, Kiba said. Then Kiba looked around the group, walking up to the bridge. Aside from their client, Tazuna, it was just Kurenai and the male members of Team 8. Sakura had been left behind at the client's house to protect his family. You know, Kiba said. I wouldn't mind having a little extra help. Even Sakura would be nice to have around. Kurenai nodded. I know what you mean, she said. I don't like to face our enemy with our strength reduced like this. But we will have to make do with what we got. Shino nodded and silently added, I hope the others will finish their objective quickly. You know, Kiba started. It's not too late for us to. The Inuzuka boy was cut off when Kurenai abruptly stopped and held her arm out. Shino looked past his sensei, noting they had arrived at the bridge. He also noted the prone bodies strung across its surface. Kiba also looked over, and he started to growl. What's going on here? Tazuna said, walking up to Kurenai's side. Why did you? Then he froze at seeing the bodies. Are they? Kurenai shook her head. No, she said. Look closely, and you can see that they're still breathing. They're unconscious. Their sensei didn't have to give the order when Kiba and Shino flanked Tazuna on either side. Kurenai had stepped in front of the client with a kunai drawn. Shino could feel his hive buzzing more intensely now. Kiba had his claws and fangs bared, and Akamaru had jumped out from his coat, growling with his hackles raising. Shino was scanning the area, trying to determine where the enemy was. At the same time, he subtly released his Kikaichu into the air and had them fan out. Because of that, he knew that the mist was thick with chakra. "Kurenai-sensei," Shino said. "I know," Kurenai replied. Well, a voice called out around them. It was Zabuza's voice. "We meet again, Kurenai-san." Shino saw Kurenai smirk. "It's good to hear your voice, Zabuza-san," she said. "I was beginning to think that you wouldn't show. That your injuries were greater than I had anticipated." Zabuza's voice chuckled all around them. "The wonders of having plenty of bed rest and a good medic," he said. Shino kept looking around, but the mist made it hard to see anything. His Kikaichu was also having difficulty picking up on the chakra of Zabuza. "My Kikaichu are having a hard time with this mist," Shino reported to his sensei. "It's saturated with chakra." Kurenai subtly nodded. "What about you, Kiba?" she whispered. "Can you smell anything?" "I can't," Kiba answered. "This mist is making it tough to pick up a scent. Even Akamaru can't smell anything." "Of course, you can't," Zabuza said. "In this mist, I am everywhere, nowhere all at once. I can be right beside you, or I can be across this quint bridge." "Quint?" Tazuna said. He was ignored. "I can even be up in the air, and you would never know," Zabuza continued. Kiba growled and bared his fangs. Shino was about to reach out for him to calm down. But it was too late to stop the brash boy from shouting. "Come out and face us, coward." Zabuza chuckled. "Inazukas are always so easy to provoke," he said. "But very well. If you insist." This time, his voice was coming from a single direction. Team 8 directed their attention to the source. They saw two shadowy figures standing in the mist. The mist started to part around the figures, allowing Team 8 to see them clearly. They were Zabuza and the fake hunter Nin from before. "So, Kurenai," Zabuza said. "Care for round 2? En route to Gato's hideout," Sensei, Naruto said. "Zabuza has made his appearance." Shursui nodded. "Just as we expected," he said. "Did he bring his partner?" Naruto nodded. Haku was right next to Zabuza as he continued to speak to Kurenai. "She is," he said. As he said that, the fighting began. They've been engaged. Kurenai is fighting Zabuza, while Kiba is taking on Haku. Shino is staying close to Tazuna. Shursui nodded. "Good," he said. "With them distracted, that should make our mission a lot easier." "What about Tazuna's family? Are they okay?" Naruto directed his gaze towards the eyes watching over Tazuna's house and his family. "They're okay," he said. Sakura is still watching them. A frown flashed across Naruto's face as two figures entered his field of vision. "Hold on. Two of Gato's thugs are walking up the house." Tazuna's house. Inari didn't know what was happening. One moment, he was walking through his home, heading to the kitchen to see what Mom was doing. Then, just as he was about to enter the kitchen, he heard a loud crashing noise, and his mother was screaming. Panic raced through the young boy as he ran into the kitchen. Then he froze when he saw two men grabbing his mom as she screamed for them to stop. "All right, little lady," one of them said. "Just come in quietly. Gato wants to have a word with you." His mother continued to kick and scream at the men. Then, one of them landed a punch on her. "Quite bitch," the man growled as Mom hit the ground. That was what finally spurred Inari into action. Without a second thought, he ran up to the kitchen counter, grabbed a knife, and ran out to face the thugs. "Leave my mom alone," he said to the men. The two men looked at him in surprise for a second. Then, they both smirked at the boy. "Or what?" one of them said, showing his teeth through his smile. "What are you going to do, little man?" "Yeah," the other man said. "What are you going to do?" Use that dainty little thing? He pointed to the knife in Inari's hands. The man's smile grew wide as he reached for his sword. Because mine's bigger, he unsheathed the sword and pointed it at Inari, who stepped back. Then, in one motion, the man put the sword to Inari's mother's neck. I have it right at your mom's neck. One wrong move and, he pressed the blade into her neck, drawing a small trail of blood. Inari, his mom said through tears. Please just run. I suggest you listen to your mommy, little boy, the other thug said. Before you're left as an orphan, or she has to look for a new kid. Inari did not know what to do. He didn't want his mom to be taken from him. But at the same time, he desperately wanted to run away. Seeing him freezing up, one of the thugs snickers and walks towards him. He had his hand on his sword. Inari closed his eyes, waiting for whatever the thug would do to him. He heard the distinct sound of a sword swinging in the air and flesh being separated from flesh. It was then followed by a sickening splashing sound. For a moment, Inari thought that the thug had cut him down, and when he opened his eyes, he would be facing the Shinigami. I'm sorry, Mom, he thought as he opened his eyes. I couldn't save you. But instead of seeing the Shinigami, he saw the headless thug falling over and hitting the floor. Shocked, Inari looked up to see that the other thug had decapitated his partner, and there was a vacant expression in his eyes. That was when a kunai pierced his skull, and the thug fell over dead, right on top of his partner. Inari looked down at the dead bodies. His mind was unable to process what had happened. He was returned to his senses when he felt someone's arms wrapping around him. Inari, he heard his mother say. Thank Kami, you're safe. You were so brave back there. Inari looked away from the corpses and turned his head to see his mother's head next to his. Tears were streaming down from her eyes. Mom? Inari said. What happened? Through the tears, his mother managed to turn her head around to face another direction. She saved us, she said. Inari looked over and saw one of the Konohanin standing by the door. The pink-haired girl he had talked to a few days ago. She was staring blankly at the dead bodies. Sakura? Inari said. At the mention of her name, the girl tore her eyes off the dead thugs and looked at Inari and his mom. The blank stare she had was quickly replaced by a look of recognition. Inari-san, Tsunami-san, are you two okay? She said, running up to them. Inari's mom nodded as she used her hand to wipe the tears off her face. Yeah, we are, she said. Thanks to you. Inari glanced over at the dead bodies of the thugs. Sakura-san, he asked the girl. What did you do? Was that you? Sakura looked at the bodies as a dark expression fell over her face. Yeah, that was me, she said distantly. I cast a genjutsu one of them. Inari tilted his head to the side. Genjutsu? He said the unfamiliar word. Sakura nodded as she looked back at the boy and his mom. It's a type of illusion we shinobi can use, she said. Basically, I trick one of them into thinking the other was his enemy. Then, I dealt with him when he was finished. Before he could come to his senses. There was a tremble in her voice that Inari could notice. But he really didn't pay that much mind. What mattered to him was that he and his mom were safe. All thanks to this girl in front of him. Tears started to well in his eyes as he tried to fight back a sob. He failed. Why you saved us, the boy wailed out. ITRTR tried to SAVM MOM, BBUTIYSSOSE scared. I could dient, he was stopped by a hand on his shoulder. Inari looked up to see that Sakura was giving him a soft smile. It's okay, Inari, she said. You're safe now, and so is your mom. All thanks to you. Inari felt his eyes widen. Really? He asked. How had he been of help? He had frozen up and done nothing. Sakura nodded at him. Yes, you did, she said. You kept the thugs busy long enough for me to cast my genjutsu on one of them. What you did was a very brave thing, Inari. A small giggle escaped her lips. Who knows, I might even be able to learn a thing or two from you about being brave. Inari stared at the girl for what felt like an eternity to him. Then more tears welled from him, and he wrapped his arms around the girl and started to cry into her chest. He didn't know how long he had been crying when he felt a hand on top of his head. It's okay, Inari, Sakura said. Just cry yourself out. Then we can see about getting you and your mother to safety. Does that sound okay? Inari couldn't get any words out through his sobbing. But he nodded his head. He didn't know what would happen. If he would ever stop crying. But he knew one thing for certain. He was never going to be scared again. En route to Gado's hideout, Naruto had relayed the events to the rest of his team. Shursui had a faint smile on his face. Kurenai would be proud, he said. How is Sakura-san holding up? Naruto looked at Sakura, seeing how she was reacting in the aftermath. I think she's holding up well, he said. But she is shaken up. I think she's focusing on keeping Inari and his mom safe for the time being. Shursui nodded. Good, he said. I'll have to let Kurenai know to talk to Sakura. She should be able to help her. Sasuke pulled up next to Naruto. Sakura really did a good job, didn't she? He said. Naruto turned his head to face his friend. Did you really have any doubts about her? He asked. Sasuke nodded his head from side to side, acknowledging Naruto's point. Well, she was one of my fangirls, he said. So was Ino, Naruto pointed out. But then she straightened out. So, why is it so hard to believe that Sakura has done the same? Sasuke hummed to himself. I guess you're right, he said. It's just that, he trailed off for a moment. That's because she's still holding out feelings for you, Naruto finished for him. Sakura-san has changed, Hinata said, joining the conversation. She might still be holding feelings for you, Sasuke-san. But I think she's slowly coming to terms with the fact that you don't see her in the same light. She's learning to move on. Both Naruto and Sasuke had surprised expressions on their faces. You're saying that she's going to stop crushing on me? Sasuke said, unhappy to mask the surprise in his tone. Hinata shook her head. No, not anything like that, she said. I think she'll always have feelings for you. But I think she is learning to let go. I see, Sasuke said, looking forward. He had a thoughtful expression on his face. I think you should talk to her. Sasuke whipped his head around to look at Hinata. I think it would help her. Sasuke opened his mouth to say something. But then he closed it and nodded. I'll think about it, he said, looking back forward. If you three are done talking, Shursui said. We've arrived at our destination. Shursui stopped atop a tree overlooking Gado's hideout. Hinata, Naruto, and Sasuke stopped on the same tree, on different branches below their sensei. So, this is it, Naruto said. Our first assassination job. He felt a shiver go down his spine. He saw Hinata nod nervously while Sasuke had a passive expression on his face. Shursui looked at the genin. One last chance, guys, he said. You can turn back and let me handle this. You can join up with Kurenai's team in their fight against Zabuza. He got no other answer than the silence from the three genin. He nodded. Then let us proceed, he said. Naruto? Naruto nodded and directed his gaze toward Gado's compound. Gado is still in his room, he said after a moment of searching. Then, a frown appeared on his face. But there appears to be fewer guards around. Shursui also frowned. Any indication where they might be? He asked. Naruto shook his head. Not that I can see, he said. Should we still continue with the mission? Shirsue's frown deepened. Yes, let's, he said. But Naruto, I want you to send your eyes off to the docks and the nearby town. I get the feeling that Gato might be planning something. Naruto nodded. On it, sensei, he said. He channels chakra into the seals on his arms, summoning more pairs of eyes. Then he sent them towards the docks and the town. Done. Let us know if you find something, Shisui said. Sasuke, when we infiltrate Gato's hideout, I want you to search the place. See if there might be anything Naruto might have missed. Sasuke nodded. Anything in particular I should look for? Naruto answered the question for Shisui. There appears to be a record room of some kind in the hideout. Naruto used his eyes to project the inside of Gato's hideout. He showed Sasuke where the record room was. I'd try looking in there. My eyes can't open scrolls or books. Shisui nodded. Good thinking, Naruto, he said. Then he looked over to Hinata. Hinata, before we kill Gato, we'll try to interrogate him. Understood? Hi, Hinata said nervously. Don't worry, Hinata, we won't have the time for a proper interrogation, Shisui said. If the fear for his life won't break him, we'll proceed with the mission as stated. That seemed to relax Hinata a little. Hi, she said. Shisui nodded and looked at Gato's hideout. Team 11, he said. The mission is a go. Hinata and Sasuke, you're with me. Hi, Shisui-sensei, the three genin. Chorused. Bridge Kiba threw himself at his opponent. He lashed his clawed hands out at the mask-wearing Kunoichi. The Kunoichi dodged his attack and threw several senbon at the Inuzuka boy. Kiba dodged the attack and threw a kunai at her. She deflected that attack, then stepped to the side, avoiding an attack from Akamaru. But Kiba did not allow the Kunoichi to relax as he charged at her. Getting in close, he tried to claw at her with his hands. The masked woman deflected the attacks but was caught off guard as Kiba quickly lowered himself and swung his feet out to her head. The Kunoichi was able to avoid one of his feet, but the second ended up connecting with her head. Kiba smiled, hoping that the blow would stagger her. His smile faded when he saw that his opponent took the blow. In the corner of his eyes, he saw a flash and a glint. Reacting quickly, Kiba pulled himself away from the Kunoichi. He avoided most of the senbon thrown at him, but a few had found their way into his shoulder. Kiba ignored the sharp pain in his shoulder. Not bad for a fake hunter nin, he said with a cocky smile. The Kunoichi stood before him, holding out more senbon in her hand. The deception was necessary, she said. Kiba rolled his eyes and casually dodged the senbon thrown by her. Yeah, I get it. We're shinobi. That kind of thing is right up our alley, he said. Naruto never mentioned that you were annoying to talk to. Kiba figured that the Kunoichi's eyes must have narrowed behind her mask. Naruto? She asked. I'm afraid I don't know anyone by that name. Kiba snorted. Don't go playing dumb with me, he said. Naruto knew who you were from the beginning, Haku. He saw the Kunoichi stiffen up. I see, she said. Then I made a mistake by talking to him. Jury is still out on that one, Kiba said. Naruto, for whatever reason, thinks you're nice. There was a slight pause before Haku responded. Then he is mistaken, she said. I am a shinobi and do what I must to complete the mission. About that, Kiba said. I am afraid your mission includes killing the man my team is protecting. Akamaru had walked to his side. Haku was silent for a moment again. We don't have to fight, she said. That took Kiba back for a loop. As I said, I will do whatever is necessary to complete my mission. That does not have to include fighting you and your team. Kiba bit back a growl. Is that so? He asked through bared teeth. Would you just let me and my team go? Just like that? Haku nodded. You and your team can leave now, she said. I can convince Zabuza-sama not to come after you once he has dealt with the bridge builder. No one else needs to die here. Kiba stared at the kunoichi for a moment before he let out a snort and lowered himself into his clan's fighting style. Naruto was right about you, he said. You really don't have a killer bone in you. Do you? What? Haku said. Kiba shook his head. Never mind, he said. I'm going to have to give your offer a hard pass. I'm a shinobi, meaning I must do whatever I can to complete my mission. Quickly, he tossed a pill over to Akamaru. Haku followed the action but was too slow to act on it. What was that? She asked. The effects of the pill were almost instant as Akamaru swallowed it. He appeared to grow larger, and his fur turned red as the dog started to let out an angry growl. Kiba smirked at his opponent. Simple, he said. What I need to do for the mission. You know of my clan's specialty, right? Haku nodded. Only what Zabuza-sama has told me, she said. Members of the Inazuka clan work with their dog partners during missions. The Inazuka have even developed special techniques that require both man and beast to work together. Kiba had a feral smile on his face. Good then, he said. Because you're about to see a demonstration. Kiba got to all fours and channeled chakra throughout his body. Imitation beast ninja art, 4 legs no jutsu. Next to him, a puff of smoke enveloped Akamaru. When it dissipated, it showed a copy of Kiba. Beast-human transformation. Haku pulled her sunbon out. I see, she said. So, you're pulling all the stops out for this. Both Kibas charged. The clang of metal meeting metal could be heard across the bridge. Then again and again in a quick session. Zabuza kept swinging his sword at his opponent, who kept parrying the blows or outright avoiding them. Metal met metal as Zabuza pressed his weight into a downward swing. He would admit he was impressed with Kurenai for being able to hold under his assault. Not bad, he said. You've gotten better since we last met. The kunoichi smiled at him. A good shinobi always strives to be better, she said. Especially when they face an opponent for a second time. Under the wrappings around his face, Zabuza smiled. He couldn't agree more with the Konohanin. So, very true, he said. Which is why I brought a friend. A little something to keep the kiddies busy while the adults sorted things out. Speaking of, he looked around the field of battle. I noticed that you are missing some of your numbers. Care to explain? He figured that 1 or 2 of the genin would be left behind to guard the bridge builder's family. But that didn't explain why Shursui wasn't here with his team. Something was up, and Zabuza did not like it. Kurenai's smile turned into a smirk. Now, why would I tell you? She asked. Even if I did know. Zabuza raised a non-existent eyebrow. You mean to tell me you don't know, he said. He pulled his sword away and jumped back as Kurenai swung her sword at him. That was a new addition to her arsenal. If Zabuza had to guess, she must have borrowed a spare from the Uchiha Jonin. Kurenai shrugged. What can I say? She replied. He's his own Jonin. Whatever he does is no business of mine. And I don't have any pull with what the Hokage says. In other words, Zabuza wasn't going to get anything out of the kunoichi. Zabuza snorted. He had figured as much. But sometimes, trying the direct approach didn't hurt. Oh well, Zabuza thought. He held his sword out and formed a hand sign with his free hand. The mist around them started to thicken, reducing the field of vision for everyone on the bridge. I'll just have to keep an eye out for any tricks these Konohanin have. With that thought in mind, Zabuza charged and swung his sword at his opponent. Hinata and Shursui were moving through the compound and they got a report from Naruto. "I found where Gato's men are," he said. The two shinobi hid in the shadows as a pair of thugs walked by. "Where are they?" Shursui asked. "They've gathered at the docks," Naruto said. "And they got their weapons on them. You think they're getting ready to attack the town or even the bridge?" Hinata felt her heart rate quacking at that thought. She didn't want to imagine what would happen to the town if Gato's men attacked. Nor did she like that they would join the battle between Zabuza and Team 8. "Either is possible," Shursui said. "We'll just have to keep an eye on it until we have dealt with Gato." "Speaking of Sasuke, have you gotten to the records room yet?" "Almost, Shursui-sensei," Sasuke said over the radio. "I'll be there in less than a minute." Shursui nodded. "Good," he said. "Once you're in there, look for anything that indicates what Gato is up to." "Hi." Shursui nodded and looked down at Hinata. "Hinata, are you ready for this?" he asked. The Hyuga girl had a pensive expression on her face. But she nodded and said, "Hi. I have to do this," she told herself. She had to prove herself worthy of being Kunoichi of Konoha and prove to herself she could stand alongside Naruto and Sasuke. Shursui looked at her for a moment. "Then let's get to it," he said. "I don't mean to make you worried or anything," Naruto's voice returned over the radio. "But it looks like that Gato is getting ready to leave." Shursui frowned. "Come on, Hinata, we need to hurry," he said before he dashed down the hallway. Hinata nodded and chased after him. Naruto statues on the fight between Team 8 and Zabuza. "Pretty evenly matched, I'd say," Naruto said. "The mist is making it hard to make out the details, but Kurenai-sensei is holding her own with Zabuza. Shino is guarding Tazuna while Kiba is fighting Haku." Hinata and Shursui were moving through the halls at a blistering pace. "How is Kiba holding up against Zabuza's accomplice?" "Holding his own," Naruto replied. "It looks like he's taking this fight seriously. He had Akamaru transform a little bit ago, and now both are coming at Haku like wild animals. It's hard to tell them apart now." Shursui nodded. The duo of Hinata and Shursui were almost at Gato's room now. "What about Sakura? Has she gotten to Tazuna's family to safety?" There was silence on the other side of the radio. "About that," Naruto said. For a second, Hinata saw Shursui's eyes narrow. "I don't know what the kid said to her. But Inari has convinced Sakura to take them back to the town. They're on their way there now." Shursui had a frown on his face. Hinata spoke up in her defense before he could get any wrong ideas about Sakura. "I'm sure she has her reasons." Shursui glanced back at her and nodded. "All right," he said. "I'll hold my judgment in reservation until she can explain herself. But for now, let's focus on the mission." Hinata nodded. They turned the corner, coming into sight of Gato's room. As the two ran down the hall, the door swung open. Two men walked out with a third smaller man right behind them. He was dressed in a business suit. Shursui vanished from Hinata's sight just as the men shouted out. "What the?" One got before his head was separated from his shoulders. Shursui appears behind the man. The other man turned around as a shocked expression morphed across his face. Then, a kunai lodged itself into the side of his neck, courtesy of Hinata. But Hinata paid the dying man no mind as she focused on Shursui as he grabbed Gato by the collar of his shirt and threw him back into his room. Hinata ran into the room as Shursui slammed the door shut behind them. Gato had been slammed into the foot of his bed. The diminutive businessman got back to his feet. He angrily stared at Hinata and Shursui. "What is the meaning of this?" he shouted. "You can't just barge in like th." His voice died when suddenly a blade was placed to his neck, and the man's face turned to a very pale shade of white. Now Gato-san," Shursui said with a smile. It's rude to yell at your guests like that. After all, we are here on business. Gato was shaking like a leaf as he realized the danger he was in. Please don't kill me, the man pleaded. I'll do anything you say. Just don't kill me. Shursui had a deadly smile on his face. Then you can start by telling us what you are planning. Bridge Haku avoided another attack from the boy named Kiba. Or was it his dog partner, Akamaru? She had long lost track of who was who as the pair continued their relentless barrage on her. The rumors don't do the Inuzuka justice, Haku thought. She knew that Inuzuka and their dog partners fought in unison. But she never realized how perfectly synced up an Inuzuka pair could be. When one went for her throat, the other went for her legs. While the other defended, the other attacked. If one was forced to dodge, the other came in with a swift counter. Haku found it extremely hard to take advantage of any openings she saw and was hard-pressed to defend herself. Looking at the pair of feral boys, it was hard to tell which was a man and which was a beast. Haku sidestepped a claw strike at her face and threw a senbon wave at one of the boys. The Inuzuka boy was able to maneuver out of the way of the senbon. Then, he and his partner threw their claws out at the young kunoichi. Behind her mask, Haku gritted her teeth. She avoided the claws, but only by a thin margin. Haku knew she was the faster of the three fighters. But with how wild and unpredictable her opponents were moving, it was getting harder and harder to avoid them. At this rate, I'll have no choice but to use that, she thought as she ducked under her opponent and shot her arm out to strike out one of the boys' stomachs. The hit connected, sending the Inuzuka skirting across the bridge. For a moment, Haku had hoped she had gotten the dog partner. If the dog was under some form of henge, that blow would have dispelled it. Unfortunately, no smoke enveloped the boy. Instead, he gave her a feral glare as his doppelganger appeared next to him. Haku eyed both warily. The one to the right is the real one, while the one to the left is his dog partner. Haku prepared a handful of senbon. I must take one of them out, or they'll overwhelm me. She was about to throw her senbon and dash for the dog partner when she noticed something. Both boys nodded at each other and looked back at her with feral smiles. The Inuzuka boy, the real one, in particular, had a smug expression on his face. Haku's eyes narrowed behind her mask. Now, what are you planning? She got her answer a second later when both boys charged at her. Reflexively, she threw her senbon at them. The attack was quickly avoided by the pair. Fong over Fong. Haku's eyes widened as she saw both boys start to spin around so fast they became like drills. The drills began to overlap around each other and hurtled toward Haku. Reacting quickly, Haku jumped out of the way of the drills. She narrowly avoided the attack. But she was caught flat-footed when the drills suddenly turned in the air and returned to her. The drills broke apart from each other, coming at Haku from different angles. Haku was able to maneuver herself in the air to avoid one of the spinning drills. But the second managed to clip her in her side. A sharp pain tore through Haku's body as she was sent flying from the impact. The kunoichi let out a pained grunt when she slammed into the ground and back into the air for a second before she landed again with a thud. Haku shakily got to her feet, feeling pain all over her body. She held her side, wincing at the contact from her hand. A clattering sound caught her attention, and she looked down. Haku's eyes widened just a bit when she saw the broken pieces of her mask on the ground. She looked back up to see her opponent standing across from her. He had a smug smirk on his face. "You going to give up now?" he asked. Haku glared at her opponent. She pulled out another handful of senbon. The Inuzuka snorted. "I thought not," he said. Then, a frown crossed his face. "Look, I don't want to hurt you any more than I have to. Naruto seems to think that you're an okay girl. I don't think he would like us fighting like this." A smile spread across Haku's face. He did come off as a bit more than naive, she said. It's not a good trait for Shinobi, and so is having a soft heart. Her opponent chuckled. Yeah, maybe, the boy admitted. But his heart is in the right place. Besides, it's not like you're any different. Haku's eyes narrowed at the boy. Care to explain that? She asked, readying to throw her senbon. The Inuzuka boy looked at her with a hard stare. You don't have it in you to kill, do you? He asked. For a moment, Haku felt like a kunai had cut her. I might not be the sharpest tool in the shed. But I can tell that senbon is no good for killing. Not unless you know what you are doing. Haku frowned at the boy. I know how to kill with senbon, she threatened. There's no poison on the ones you hit me with, her opponent pointed out. And you haven't been aiming anywhere where it could be fatal for me or Akamaru. You've been aiming for places that would slow me down or paralyze me. You don't want to kill me, and you don't want to hurt me either. And that's holding you back. Haku winced internally. The boy had gotten right to the heart of her most fatal flaw. Haku could not bring herself to hurt or kill others, even when necessary. It was something that Zabuza told her would get her killed one day. Would cause her to fail him one day. Haku felt her hands shaking at that thought. She couldn't fail Zabuza, not now, not ever, not after everything he had done for her. Give up already, her opponent said. You can't fight for much longer. Not with the injury I gave a second ago. I won't give up, Haku spat out. I can't fail Zabuza-sama. Her opponent's eyes narrowed at her. Why is that guy so important to you? He's a jerk. He narrowly dodged the senbon thrown at his neck. A look of surprise spread across his face. Don't you ever speak of Zabuza-sama like that, Haku shouted. If it weren't for him, I would not be here. In her mind, the memories of her life in Kiri flashed by. First were the good times, when her family had been whole, when they were happy together. Then came the darker memories, her father killing her mother, a mob of people coming for her, and blood-stained ice. Her opponent's frown deepened. Why shouldn't I? He asked. He's the enemy and has been trying to kill us and the client. But I can't figure out why someone like you would work for someone like that. For Kami's sake, they call him the demon of the bloody mist. People don't call you that if you're a saint. So, why are you so loyal to him? He probably only sees you as a tool to be used. Haku lowered her arms as the boy's words cut deep into her. He was right, and Haku knew it. Her master was a bloodthirsty killer, there was no denying that. Haku knew he didn't treat her like a friend, partner at best, or tool, most likely. Not to say he wasn't cruel to her. He just rarely showed her any kindness, if ever. Haku knew that wasn't much of a reason to follow a man like Zabuza. But she still did, and with a fervent devotion. A faint memory played in the back of Haku's mind as her grip tightened around her senbon. A memory of an empty road, covered in snow, and a man walking up to her. He had offered her something no one else had given the young girl. A choice. A choice between life and death. Because he saved my life, Haku said just above a whisper, enough for the boy to hear her. Haku looked at her opponent. She saw the look of surprise on his face. Because he gave me a reason to live. She formed several hand signs with her free hand. The air around the combatants became frigid, and the wind picked up. Her opponent looked around, trying to see where the cold air was coming from. What's going on here? He asked. A gift that I was born with, Haku explained as the wind swept around her and formed ice crystals in the air. And the reason I was hunted back in Kiri. Her opponent's eyes as the realization dawned on him. A Kekii Genkai, he muttered. You have a Kekii Genkai. Haku nodded. One that grants me control over ice, she said. The ice crystals in the air began to grow and form into mirrors that surrounded the combatants in a dome. Haku took a step back, entering one of the mirrors. In an instant, reflections of herself appeared in all the mirrors. Hayaton, demonic mirroring ice crystals. The Inuzuka growled, which was followed by his partner joining him. What is this? He asks, looking around at all the ice mirrors. My strongest jutsu, Haku said, looking at the boy with pity. And your doom. She could not fail Zabuza, not now, not ever, not after everything he had done for her. If she had to, she would shatter her own heart. Blade clashed against metal as Kurenai and Zabuza danced around each other in the mist. Kurenai wasn't a sword specialist but knew enough to keep up with other sword-wielding opponents. However, against Zabuza, a former member of the Seven Swordsmen of the Mist, it was a struggle just to survive. The Genjutsu mistress ducked under a sword swing that would have taken her head off. She swung up with her sword, which was parried by Zabuza. Kurenai had tried casting her Genjutsu to get an early win on the swordsman, but to her chagrin, she found that the man had come prepared for them. As it were, she could only use simple Genjutsu to even the playing field. One here to make it look like she was moving faster or slower than what she was, another to reverse his sight. Subtle little things that kept her alive and fighting. It spoke of her opponent's skill that he managed to adjust to them or break the Genjutsu she cast on him. But Kurenai knew that this could not last forever. Zabuza was simply too good of a swordsman for her to best, and with his counters to Genjutsu, most of her arsenal had been locked down. She still had a good ninjutsu and taijutsu skill set to fall on if she faced an ordinary foe. She could manage a win. It was just her luck that she was up against Zabuza. Zabuza swung his massive sword out, cleaving through Kurenai's side and cutting her in two. The Genjutsu mistress reappeared behind Zabuza just as the shatter log fell. She swung her sword out, aiming for the missing Nin's neck. He spun around and blocked the attack. It was a good thing that Kurenai's mission was not to beat Zabuza. Only delay him long enough for the mission to be complete. Somehow, Kurenai could see the smirk under Zabuza's face wrappings. I admit you're not half bad for a swordsman, he said. I don't know many that could hold out this long in a straight-up sword fight against me. Kurenai smiled back at her opponent. If this had been a straight-up sword fight, I would be dead by now, she said. This got a chuckle from the Form 7 swordsman. True, he said. Without your little tricks, I would have gutted you by now and have been down with that bridge builder. You truly live up to your reputation as the Genjutsu mistress of Konoha. It seems your village of tree huggers are not as weak as everyone believes it is. Kurenai ignored the subtle jab at her village. Just have a look at our history, she said. And you'll see that for yourself. Zabuza nodded his head, acknowledging her point. Then, the two jonin felt a frigid air blow through them. They turned their attention to the direction of the cold air. What the? Kurenai said. She could feel the chakra laced in the cold air. A chuckle from her opponent brought her attention back to him. Zabuza, what's going on? She asked him. Even with the face wrapping on, Kurenai could tell that Zabuza was smiling at her. It looks like one of your brats has managed to push my partner to take her fight seriously, he said. A mad look appeared on the swordsman's face. And I think it's time I did the same. Shursui, please hurry, Kurenai thought. Gato's hideout, Naruto's voice grabbed Hinata's and Shursui's attention. Shursui frowned as he glared at Gato's sniveling form. What is it, Naruto? Shursui asked. Something going on with Kurenai and her team? You can say that, Naruto said. Kiba got a good hit on Haku, used that spiny drill thing his clan is known for. Fong over Fong, Shursui quipped. Hinata rolled her eyes as Naruto responded. Yeah, that, he said. But it didn't drop her out of the fight, and now she's taken it up a notch. She's summoned these weird ice mirrors all around Kiba and entered one of them. Hinata saw Shirsue's eyes narrow. Ice mirrors, he muttered. But that would mean, Shirsue's eyes almost seemed to bulge out. He cursed under his breath. Damn it, I should have known that Zabuza would have a trick like this. His partner is no ordinary kunoichi. She has a Kekii Genkai. Hinata felt her eyes widen. A Kekii Genkai? Naruto's voice said over the radio. You mean like what Sasuke and Hinata have? Shirsue nodded. Correct, he said. Though, in this case, it's not a Dojutsu. It sounds like an elemental release. A smirk appeared on Gato's face as the fear faded away. It looks like my boy Zabuza and his girl are coming through for me, he said with an arrogant smirk. They'll be finished with your friends and come after you next. Shirsue stared blankly at the diminutive businessman, who kept his cocky smirk up as he stood up from his knees. The man promptly screamed and fell back on his bed as a kunai buried itself in his leg. Hinata looked at her sensei with shock as he pulled his outstretched hand back. Hinata, I think it's time you finish the mission, Shirsue said coolly. We got what we want from this man. Hinata felt a cold chill go down her spine as she realized what would happen next. She slowly nodded at her sensei and, with a breath, looked at Gato. Hinata walked up to the man clutching his bloody leg and drew out one of her kunai. Gato noticed her approaching him and paled when he saw the kunai in her hand. Wait, no, the man said. I told you everything I know. You can't kill me like this. You promised to spare me. No, Shirsue said. We never agreed to spare you. Hinata was standing over Gato as he looked between her and Shirsue. But you said you would spare me if I told you my plans for Zabuza. Hinata didn't need her Byakugan to know her sensei was shaking his head. I said we would consider sparing you if you told us what you were planning, he said. And we've considered it. Unfortunately for you, we still have a mission to complete. Wait, no, Gato pulled a large sum of cash from his jacket. Whatever they are paying you, I can pay you double, no triple. You can even take some of the women we have. Hinata looked at the man with disgust. I'm afraid we can't do that, Shirsue explained. We have direct orders from our Hokage to have you killed. It would seem that somewhere along the way, you managed to upset some very powerful people, Gato. Now they want their pound of flesh or, in this case, your head. Hinata? Hinata nodded and held her kunai. Fear filled the eyes of the man in front of her. His shaking hand drops the weight of cash. PL please, you don't have to do this, he pleaded. For a moment, Hinata felt anger building up in her. After everything he had done. The way he had made the people of Wave suffer. How many others had pleaded with him? How many begged for their lives before he had them killed? Now he had the gall to beg for his own life? Please don't kill me, Gato continued to beg for his life. I'll do anything. Whatever it is, money, power, women, it's yours. Just don't kill me. Hinata felt her grip tighten around her kunai. Everything she had seen here in Wave flashed before her eyes. The people in the streets, the empty shops, the hunger, and the dead look in the eyes of the people. The children begging for scraps. Bring them back, she said. What? Gato said, looking at Hinata. Hinata's eyes narrowed at the pathetic man before her. I said bring them back, she repeated her demand. Everyone you had killed and starved to death because of you. Everyone whose blood is on your hands. I want you to bring them back. I want you to make amends for everything that you have done. But that's impossible, Gato said. No one can bring the dead back. Then his eyes widen as he realizes what he did. Wait, no, his last plea died in his throat as the kunai found its way into his heart. Hinata twisted the kunai into the man's chest, causing him to let out a guttered choke. He tried to reach his hand out. For what, no one could tell. His arm fell to the floor as the rest of his body went limp, his head hung down. Hinata stood up and looked down at the man she had killed. She jumped when she felt a hand on her shoulder. She looked over to see Shisui giving her a sad smile. "Good job," he said. He looked over at Gato's corpse. "I'll take care of the rest from here. Do you have the scroll?" Hinata nodded glumly as she was still staring at Gato's dead body. Unconsciously, she pulled the sealing scroll Naruto had made out and handed it to her sensei. The scroll was taken out of her hand. Shisui walked into the field of Hinata's vision up to Gato's corpse. He knelt and grabbed the hilt of his sword. "Hinata," he said, pulling the sword from its sheath. "You don't have to be here for this. You can go outside while I finish up here." Hinata opened her mouth to say something. But then she closed it and nodded. "Thank you, sensei," she said, bowing. Shisui nodded at her. Hinata walked out of the room. When she closed the door behind her, she put a hand over her mouth and tried to breathe. "I killed," again the thought went through the young girl's head. She has killed for the second time in her life, and this wasn't against bandits or out of self-defense. She had killed a defenseless man, a terrible man, but still a defenseless one. One that had begged for his life. Hinata felt her legs shaking, but she remained standing. She knew that it had been a part of the mission, that she did her duty as kunoichi to Konoha. Not to mention that Gato, in all likelihood, deserved what happened to him. With everything he had done and things he allowed his thugs to do. Even still, Hinata felt guilty about what she had done. She remembers her conversations with her parents about killing in the days following Team 11's first C-rank mission. "Father, Mother," Hinata had said. "Will I always feel this way? When I kill someone, will I feel this guilt? Like that I did something wrong?" Her parents had exchanged a look, a sign they were having a silent conversation. Her father had been the one to answer. "It does get easier, Hinata. You feel a little less each time you do it, and the guilt will ache a little less. But you will always feel something, Hinata, and I think that is a good thing. It shows that you are still human. That you are still my sweat, little girl." Then her mother spoke next. "Just remember, Hinata. You don't have to shoulder all your burdens alone. You have people who care about you. They'll want to help you." Looking back at it now, Hinata found some comfort in her parents' words. The door behind her opened. Shisui walked out, holding the sealing scroll. "We're done here," he said to Hinata. Hinata nodded at him and followed him down the hall. "Sasuke, did you find what we're looking for?" There was some static over the radio for a second. But a moment later, Sasuke's voice sounded in Hinata's ear. "No," he said. "But I did find a lot of Gato's financial records, not just on his business, but for all his activities." Shisui nodded. "Good, we can use that," he said. "Don't worry about finding out about Gato's plans. Me and Hinata already got it out from him. Just grab everything you can find and meet us outside the hideout. We'll return for the rest once we finish Subuza." "Hi sensei." "Guys," Naruto said. "I think we need to hurry back to the bridge. Gato's men are heading there now, and Kiba looks more and more like a pincushion." Hinata looked at Shisui, seeing the worried expression on his face. "Everyone to the bridge, now." Bridge Kiba got to his feet, ignoring the sharp pain he felt throughout his body. He was certain that he resembled a porcupine more than a human or even a dog. He glared at his opponent or one of her reflections. It was impossible to tell which one of the icy mirrors contained the real kunoichi. Those mirrors were a real pain in the ass to deal with. Not only did it make it impossible to pinpoint where his opponent was, but the things were damn near invincible. Kiba had tried everything he could to shatter the mirrors around him, from punching them to using fang over fang, not even a scratch. He had even attempted the few katan jutsus he knew, and they had no effect. "Damn you," Kiba choked out, glaring at the woman's reflection. He turned his gaze away for a second to see how Akamaru was doing. To his dismay, he saw that his partner was doing no better than he was. Akamaru's henge had long since dispelled, and the poor thing looked more like a pincushion with legs. "Surrender now," Haku said, staring at him with an impassive face. "I do not wish to inflict any more harm than I have to. Please don't force me to kill the two of you." Kiba glared back at the ice-wielding kunoichi and growled at her. "Like hell, I'll give up," he said. He bared his claws and fangs. "I still have a mission to complete." Of course, the question was, how was he supposed to do that against an opponent like Haku? Every time she jumped out from one of the mirrors, she moved at such high speeds that she appeared to be a blur to Kiba. He had to wonder if even the eyes of a Uchiha could keep up with her. Haku pulled out more senbon. Just how many of those things did she have? "Very well then," she said coldly. "You leave me no choice." "I am sorry." Kiba prepared himself for the hail of senbon that would fall on him and Akamaru. He was even ready for the possibility that he would fall and not get back up. The kunoichi moved out from her mirror. Kiba saw a blur, then several flashes and the sound of metal meeting metal. "What?" Kiba said, having expected more senbon to have struck him, but instead, his opponent had returned to a mirror. She had a look of shock on her face as her hand was covering what looked like a burn mark. "Looks like we got here just in time," a familiar voice said. A smile spread across Kiba's face as he turned to face Sasuke. "Hey team, what took you guys so long?" Kiba said. "Got tired of your little patrol in the town and decided to join up with the real action?" Sasuke smirked at him. "Something like that," Sasuke said. Then he turned his attention to Haku. "Just sit tight, Kiba, I can handle this." Kina frowned. "Like hell, I'll let you fight her alone," he said. Sasuke's smirk grew. "Who said I was fighting her alone?" It was then that several eyeballs started to float down around them. Kiba looked outside the dome of ice mirrors and saw Naruto standing there with swarms of eyes surrounding him. "Don't worry, Kiba. Sasuke and I got this," Naruto said. He formed a hand sign. In a puff of smoke, several shadow clones of the boy appeared. Kiba let out a snort and chuckled. "Still," he said. "I think we would like to finish what we started." "It won't matter," Haku said, looking at Kiba and Sasuke. "It does not matter how many of you there are. I will fight all of you if I have to. Anything for my precious person." Kiba saw Naruto frown. "So, he was the guy you were thinking of," he said. "He's your precious person, isn't he?" A sad smile spread across Haku's face. "Naruto," she said, turning her head to the side. "I had hoped you would stay out of this. I didn't wish to hurt you." Naruto nodded. "And I don't want to hurt you either," he said. "But a mission is a mission. I don't like it, but I guess that's the life of a shinobi sometimes." Haku's smile faded, and Kiba saw genuine hurt in her eyes. "So, what will it be?" she asked. "Will I have to kill you? Your friends? Because I will freeze my heart over for Zabuza." A strained smile spreads across Naruto's face. "With any luck, that won't be necessary," he said. The confused look on Haku's face mirrored the one on Kiba's. Sasuke?" Kiba whispered to Sasuke. "What is he on about?" Sasuke looked at him. "You'll see in a moment," Sasuke said. "The same thing goes for you, too, Haku. If everything goes as planned, your master won't have a reason to fight us anymore." Haku raised an eyebrow but remained silent on the matter. "It's about time you got here," Kurenai said harshly as Shisui appeared beside her. I wasn't sure how long I could hold out against him. Shisui gave her a cheeky smile. What can I say, he said. Heroes always got to be a little late to the party. Kurenai rolled her eyes. I assume you completed the mission, she said. Shisui nodded. We won't have to worry about Gato anymore, he said. So, you finally decided to show up, Zabuza said. And here I was about to get bored fighting your lady friend. Shisui looked around the mist, trying to locate Zabuza. Zabuza, it's good to see you, he said. Or I guess I'll hear from you. How about you come out? I got a little something to show you. He pulled out a scroll. There was low laughter throughout the mist. And why would I do that? Zabuza said. Do you take me for a fool? No, Shisui replied. I don't. But I think you will be interested in this scroll's contents. Without giving the former Kiri swordsman a chance to respond, Shisui opened the scroll and applied chakra to the seal written on it. A heavy silence fell over the mist as the contents of the scroll were summoned. You are tricking me, Zabuza's voice came over the mist with a low growl. Shisui shook his head as he held the severed head of Gato up in the air. It is no trick, Zabuza, he said. You can examine the head yourself if that doesn't convince you. Head back for your little hideout and examine in Gato's chamber. More silenced, answered Shisui. Then, the mist around them began to clear but did not completely go away. Just enough so that Kurenai and Shisui could see where Zabuza was standing. The swordsman still had his sword drawn, and he had an unreadable expression. Hand me his head, he said. Shisui nodded and tossed the head over to Zabuza. Just be careful with it, he said, pulling another scroll out, Team 11's mission orders. We need it as proof of my team's completion of the mission. He tossed the mission scroll over to Zabuza. The head landed at Zabuza's feet while he caught the scroll. With a flick of his wrist, the scroll fell open. Zabuza's eyes went between the scroll's contents and the Gato's head at his feet. The unreadable expression was still on his face. After a moment, that expression fell away to something between amusement and disappointment. A low chuckle escaped from the man's throat. So, Gato finally went and crossed the wrong person, he said. And here I was, hoping to be the one to deal with him. Zabuza placed his sword on his back and rolled the scroll up. He picked up Gato's head and tossed it and the scroll back to Shisui. Well played, Shisui, well played. Shisui smelled as he caught the head and scroll. I assume we no longer have reason to fight, he said. Your employer is dead now. He won't be paying you anymore. Zabuza snorted and dispelled the rest of the mist. Don't worry, he said. The bridge builder is safe. He looked at the dome of ice mirrors several feet away from him and the Jonin. Haku, stand down. Our mission is a bust. Gato is dead. Shisui and Kurenai nodded at each other. Team 8, stand down, Kurenai said. Team 11, stand down, Shisui said. Just like that, the Battle of Wave had ended, or it seemed. Haku was surprised when she heard her master telling her to stand down. But like the obedient tool she was, she stood down. She dispelled her ice mirrors with a simple hand sign and sighed in relief when she saw the Konoha genin doing the same thing. She shared a brief glance with Naruto. The boy smiled and nodded at her. Swarms of eyes floated around him. So, he was the one with those eyes, Haku thought to herself. She would have to inform Zabuza of that. With a hand sign, she vanished from where she stood and reappeared next to Zabuza. Her master gave her a curt nod before he turned his attention back to the Konoha Jonin. Looking at the one known as Shisui Uchiha, she could see why Zabuza had told her to stand down. Their employer, Gato, was dead. Not that Haku was saddened by that fact. A small part of her was just disappointed that Zabuza and her had been beaten to the punch. "So, what are we going to do now?" Zabuza asked the Konoha Jonin. "Do you let us leave in peace? Or can we expect hunters from Kiri soon?" Shursui shook his head. "We can settle that later," he said. Then, an expression fell over his face. "But first, we got some other matters to deal with." "I was wondering when you were going to bring that up," Zabuza said. He turned around to face something while reaching for his sword. Haku raised an eyebrow and turned around to face the same direction as her master. Her eyes narrowed at what she saw. An army of armed men stood at the end of the bridge. Gato's men had arrived. "Well, this is unexpected," one of the thugs said. "We came here expecting to pick up the scraps. But instead, we're getting the whole main course." Even before the Konoha Jonin spoke, Haku could feel her jaw clenching together. "As you can see, Gato never intended to pay you." "Yes, I can see that," Zabuza said in a low, dangerous voice. "What are you lot doing here?" "I thought Gato wanted me to off the old man." The thugs smirked at Zabuza. "Well, here's the thing," one of them said. "Our boss had second thoughts about that. He thinks you and your partner were a bit too expensive. So, he sent us to cheapen things up." It was at this point that Haku started to see red. She stepped forward, ready to turn the low-life thug into a popsicle, and a low-quality one at that. An outstretched hand stopped her. Haku looked glared at the source of the arm. It was the boy she met a few days ago, Naruto. The blonde-haired boy with the headband as a blindfold smiled at her and mouthed wait. Confusion overtook anger as Haku stared at the boy. He just kept smiling at her. A snort got her attention. "Well, too bad for you, none of us are getting paid today," Zabuza said. He nodded toward the Uchiha Jonin. The Uchiha stepped forward and held Gato's head out for all to see. A ripple of gasps washed across the horde of thugs. "Gato is dead," the Uchiha Jonin said. "There is no need for any of us to fight." Chatter began among the horde of thugs. Some of them seriously considered leaving now that their employer was deceased. Then, one brave idiot spoke up. "Yeah, so what if our meal ticket is gone?" he said. "I say we pillage the town and take everything they have. Then we can sort through what Gato has left behind." That got more talk among the thugs. From what Haku could hear, most agreed with the man. The man turned his attention to the group of shinobi on the bridge. "And I say we start with killing these brats and their senseis," he said. His smirk grew. "There's only a few of them and an army of us." That galvanized the rest of the thugs. Haku frowned and drew the senbon out, readying herself for a fight. From the corners of her eyes, she saw Zabuza and the Konohanin doing the same thing. "You sure about that?" Naruto shouted at the thugs. The same thugs sneered at Naruto. "Oh, and why is that blind boy?" he said. "I know you can't see, but even you can tell you and your friends are outnumbered." An arrow stuck itself in the ground right in front of the thug. The man backed away in fright. "What the?" he shouted out. Naruto's smile grew. "Not as outnumbered as you think," he said. Everyone turned their attention to the source of the arrow. Haku raised an eyebrow, Zabuza started to laugh, and the rest of the Konohanin looked surprised. However, the Uchiha Jonin had a knowing smile. Behind the army of thugs were all the townspeople assembled together. All of them were armed with whatever weapons they could find. Pitchforks, rakes, scythes, kitchen knives, you name it, at least one townsperson had it on them. In front of this makeshift army was a little boy armed with a crossbow and the pink-haired kunoichi holding a kunai out. At the sight of the angry and motivated army of Wave's people, fear emanated through the thugs. They were not so sure about their chances anymore. But still, Haku could see a few brave souls in their ranks. Well, I guess they need a little more persuading, Naruto mutters. He made a single hand sign, and dozens of clones appeared in a puff of smoke. The Konoha Jonin made the same hand sign, summoning more clones to the bridge. The Hyuga Genin activated her Byakugan, and the Aburame had a swarm of insects coming out of him. The other Genin pulled out kunai. Haku channeled her chakra, summoning several ice mirrors into the air, and pulled out her Senbon. Fear ripped through the ranks of the thugs at seeing what they were up against. Haku could see that their morale was hanging on by a thread. One more push, and they would break. Oh, Naruto said, like he had just remembered something. He held his hand out. One more thing, a twisted smile spread across his lips. There was screaming in the air as several thugs fell to the ground, bleeding out from their eyes. Or they would have been if their eyes had not been flying through the air and toward the blonde-haired boy. There was no hiding the shock on Haku's face at what she witnessed. Whatever it was the final straw for the Gado's thugs. With a panic scream, the thugs began to run away in every direction they could. Most jumped off the bridge to avoid the angry mob of villagers and the shinobi. Zabuza let out a disappointed snort. "Wusses," he said, putting his sword back on his back. "And here I was hoping to have some fun." Even as the cheers of the villagers reached her ears, Haku could not help but roll her eyes at her master's antics. However, there was a smile on her lips. She turned to face Naruto, who was smiling at her. "I'm glad we were able to avoid fighting each other," he said. "I don't know what I would do if we had." Haku nodded at Naruto, sharing his sentiment. She didn't want to think what would have happened if that had been the case. She didn't want to be responsible for the death of someone she would call a friend. The Battle of Wave had ended. "Bridge, my hand," a construction worker shouted. He dropped his hammer and nursed his hand. "Here, let me help," Haku said, walking up to the man. She took the man's swollen hand. She looked it over to see if the hammer had done any other damage. Seeing nothing else, she took her other hand and channeled chakra into it. A green aura surrounded her hand as she laid it over the swollen hand of the man. Within moments, the swelling started to go down. A minute later, the man's hand was fully healed. She let go of the man's hand. The man examined his hand with awe. "Thank you, young lady," he said. "That was sure impressive what you did there." Haku smiled back at the man and nodded her head. "No need to thank me," she said. "I was just making myself useful. But please be more careful next time." The man nodded at her. "I will," he said. "Thanks again." The man turned around and went back to his work. Haku let out a light sigh and looked around to see if anyone else needed help. With Gato out of the picture and their mission effectively a failure, Zabuza and her had to figure out what they would do next. Thankfully, the locals and the Konoha were willing to let them stay under, and the two could figure out something. Zabuza was stuck back at the Gato's old hideout, pilfering the place for everything it had that he could get anyway. An agreement had been reached with the Konoha. Zabuza and her would take half of Gato's wealth in Wave, while the rest would go into the people of Wave. It was something Haku knew her master was not happy about. But her master knew that he had little choice in the matter, and the deal the Konoha had presented was more than fair. Haku smiled, but that still didn't stop her master from pouting like a little kid. "Demon of the Mist, indeed. I'm surprised to find you here," a voice said. Haku turned around to face one of the Konoha, the Jonin Kurenai. "Kurenai-san," Haku said with a slight bow to her fellow kunoichi. "It is good to see you. What are you doing here?" "Just keeping an eye on things here," Kurenai said, looking around the construction site. "Even though Gato is gone, my team still has a mission to complete." Haku nodded. "I understand," she said. "Now, what about you?" Kurenai said. "I thought you would be at your master's side. Is something the matter?" Haku shook her head. No, nothing is wrong, she answered. I feel that Zabuza-sama does not need my help searching Gato's former hideout. Kurenai nodded at her. I thought you would be worried about him, she said. Since he's all alone with 3 Konohanin. One of which is Uchiha Shisui. They could easily ambush him and be done with him before you arrive in time. Haku strained to smile. And in that same light, you could be here to finish me, she pointed out. It was a thought that had occurred to her. She discarded the thought just as quickly as it came. I don't think I have anything to worry about. Oh? Kurenai said with an intrigued expression. And why is that? Haku smiled. Because I don't think Naruto would allow something like that to happen. Kurenai raised an eyebrow. What makes you think he would have any say in the matter, she asked. He is just a genin. Haku smiled. I think you would listen to him even if he had been wearing a kill me orange jumpsuit and shouted from the top of a mountain that he was going to be king of the world. The Konoha Jonin let out a snort. I don't know about being king of the world, she said. But he does want to be the leader of our village one day. Really now, Haku said. Somehow, that did not surprise her. And you already had your chance at us and never took it. The battle on the bridge 2 days ago had been exhausting for both Zabuza and her. While Team 8 was just as tired, they had fresh reinforcements in the form of Team 11 and the assembled townspeople. Haku was unsure if they could have made it out alive if the Konohanin had chosen to finish them. Kurenai nodded. I suppose you have a point, she said. Besides, with Gato out of the way, we had no reason to fight each other. Though I suppose we could have tried collecting the bounty on Zabuza's head. Last I heard, it was quite high, about equal to 2 or 3 A-rank missions. Could have made some good use out of money like that. What about me? Haku asked with a raised eyebrow. Kurenai just shrugged her shoulders. No mention of you anywhere in the bingo books. Now, that was just insulting. Gato's hideout, wait, no. Please don't The thug's pleading was cut short as a giant meat cleaver slashed through him. His dead body hit the floor with a sickening wet thud. Do you have to make such a mess? Naruto asked as he ducked under a sword swing from a thug. A well-placed kunai through to the back of his neck ended the man. Now, don't get so squeamish around me, Gaki, Zabuza said as he thrust his sword forward, impaling the poor thug before him. In any other circumstance, Naruto would have felt bad for the guy. But since he was one of Gato's thugs, he found that his pity well was bottomed out. Just don't like the mess, Naruto said. He looked around, seeing that there were no more enemies around. Just dead bodies everywhere. More than a few were a bloody mess. It was something that Naruto knew he would be seeing in his nightmares for a while. You do realize that I'm just a kid, right? Naruto said. He saw Zabuza roll his eyes. A kid who has already killed, he pointed out. Not to mention what happened with your real eyes. If you're to killing, you should be getting used to carnage like this. Naruto had some of his eyes rolling at the bloody thirsty nin's argument. Killing maybe, he said. Naruto wasn't sure if he would ever get used to the feeling of having to kill a person. Even now, he could still feel his stomach wanting to empty itself. But this? He gestured to the bloody messes made by Zabuza. I don't think so. Zabuza snorted. Wuss, he said. Lucky for you, there doesn't appear to be anyone left for me to make a mess of, he said. And here I was, just starting to warm up. Gaki, can you see anyone else? Naruto looked through his eyes to see if any more of Gato's thugs remained in the hideout. Naruto shook his head. No one in the bottom floors, he said. The top floors are being cleared by Shisui and Sasuke. The rest of the thugs look like they ran. Zabuza nodded and put his large meat cleaver-like sword on his back. Then let's finish what we came here to do, he said, walking down the hall. Naruto nodded, and after collecting some new eyes, he followed the psychotic man. After a couple of minutes of silence, the pair were at their destination. You know, I'm a little surprised you chose to be down here, Naruto commented. I thought you would be the first to want to look over what Gato had. Not down here to check on his other possessions. Naruto didn't want to say another word. It would be too sour in his mouth. Zabuza was silent for a moment as he seemed to be staring at something off in the distance. I just wanted to make sure that there were no distractions. You can never know what could get in the way of business. Naruto frowned for a second but hid it quickly. I guess even a guy like you has standards, he said. The Kiri swordsman gave Naruto a raised eyebrow. That's impressive, considering the guy had no eyebrows to speak of. What did he do to shave them off, or did he just not grow any? Just get on with the mission, he said in a low growl. Do you see any of Gato's men in the room? Naruto shook his head. He had already checked the room before they got here. No, he said. Aside from its usual occupants, no one else is in there. For that, he was thankful. Zabuza nodded. Good then, he said. I would hate for things to get messy in there. And we both know how much you hate that. Naruto didn't need eyes to know that there was a cheeky smile under those face wrappings. Once again, I have to wonder how someone as nice as Haku is following a guy like you, he said. Just open the door, Zabuza said. Naruto opened the door, and the pair walked into the large room. Calling it a room was generous, as the better description would be a dungeon. Several dozens, if not hundreds, of people cramped together in small cells throughout the room. Nearly all of them were women or young girls barely dressed in anything, if at all. Some women looked at the newcomers with fear in their eyes, particularly at Zabuza. Naruto felt his heart sink when he saw a girl around Inari's age looking at him with an expression halfway between dead and fearful. She was huddling next to a woman who could be her mother. Zabuza stepped forward. All right, bitches, you're free, he said. Gato's dead, so you don't have to worry about him anymore. His men have scattered to Kami known where or have joined up with their master in the afterlife. So, get out. Naruto resisted the urge to stab the man. Do you really have to say it like that? He asked the man. These women have been through enough already, can't you be a little more sensitive? Zabuza shrugged his shoulders. Me and sensitive don't go well together, he said. I just told them how it is. They're free now, and I couldn't care less what happens next. Naruto ground his teeth together. But, he was silenced when Zabuza gave him a sharp glare. Look, Gaki, he said. I'm the fucking demon of the mist. Not some mommy of the mist. I kill people. That's about what I'm good for. He gestured his head towards the women and children, still looking at them with fear and confusion. You think you can do a better job than me? Go ahead, trust me when I say that is a low bar. If you need me, I'll be outside. Before Naruto could say anything to the man, he walked out. Naruto balled his hands into fists. How can Haku call a man like that master? Naruto thought bitterly. It made no sense to him that someone as kind and gentle as Haku would follow a man like Zabuza. Calm down, Kit, Kurama said in the back of Naruto's mind. Do not be so quick to judge her for following that man. You do not know what events led her there or why she continues to follow him. I know Kurama, Naruto said to the fox. But I can't imagine why I would follow that guy. He's a jerk. Perhaps, Kurama said. But she does have her reasons. Maybe you should try asking her. Her answer may surprise you. Naruto was silent for a moment. Perhaps, he said, looking at the doorway. But first things first, he glanced at the chamber's occupants. The women were still looking at him in fear. He gave them the best reassuring smile he could give and walked up to the nearest group. Some of the women tried to crawl away from him, while some of the others tried to shield the younger children. Naruto held his hands up in a non-threatening to show them he meant no harm. "It's okay," he said, keeping his voice soft and gentle. "I'm not here to hurt you. My friends and I are here to help you." A couple of the women looked at him with surprised expressions while the rest continued to be afraid. "You don't have to worry about anything. Gato is dead, and his men are fleeing from Wave." Now, that seemed to catch the attention of everyone in the room. "Gato is dead?" one of the women asked. "Is it true?" Small conversations were breaking out among the women, all asking the same thing. "He is," Naruto confirmed. "If you don't believe me, you can always go up to his chambers and check his corpse yourself." Several women flinched at this. Naruto tilted his head to the side, then cursed himself for the careless mistake. "Or I could ask one of my friends to drag it down here." The women started looking at each other, and more small conversations broke out. But eventually, one of them was chosen to speak to him. "Bring him down here," the woman said. Naruto nodded and walked away from the women, letting them talk among themselves. He activated the radio and contacted Shisui. "Shisui-sensei," he said. On the upper floors, he saw his sensei stop in his tracks as he held his hand up to his ear. "Yes, Naruto, what is it?" he asked. "Zabuza and I have cleared the lower floors," Naruto said. "And we reached our destination." He saw Shisui nodding. "Good, how are the women down there?" he asked. "Do they need any help?" "About as well as you expected, Sensei," Naruto answered. "They probably thought Nobrows and I was there too well, you know." It wasn't a thought he wanted to finish. Shisui nodded. "I understand, Naruto," Shisui said. "And I know you would never do something like that." Naruto nodded. "I know," he said. "I told them that Gato is dead, and his men are gone. But I think seeing would be believing. Can you take his body down here for them to see?" Naruto saw Shisui standing still for a second before he saw him nodding. "All right," he said. "I'm on my way there now." Naruto watched Shisui take off towards Gato's room. "Naruto, can you tell me if any more of Gato's thugs are hanging around the hideout?" Naruto shook his head. "No, I can't see any more of them," he said. "We got them all, or they fled." "What about the docks?" Shisui asked. "Have you been keeping an eye on them?" Naruto nodded. His view shifted over to the docks. "It looks like whatever is left of Gato's thugs are gathering there," he said. "My best guess is that they'll use the boats there to escape Wave. Good riddance, I say. Just keep a watch over them," Shisui said. "I don't want to be caught by surprise. Once we're done here, we'll head for the docks and make sure they leave Wave for good." Naruto nodded. "I think everyone in Wave will breathe a little easier tonight after they're gone," he said. A few minutes later, Shisui was dragging Gato's lifeless and decaying body into the chamber. At that time, some of the women had gotten brave enough to walk out of the chamber and confirm that several of Gato's men had been killed. Some of them are rather messy. Not that it affected them that much. In fact, some of the women appeared to be happy that their abusers had died in such a way. "All right, here it is," Shisui said, dropping the body to the floor. "One not entirely fresh corpse. I believe this will be enough to satisfy you." The women were looking at the body with distant stares. "Is it really him? Could it be? Are we free?" One of the women stood up, walked over to the body, and stared down at it. "It really is him," she said. "I'd recognize that fat bastard anywhere, even without his head." She looked over at Shisui and Naruto. Speaking of, Naruto knew what she was going to ask. "Don't worry about that," he said. "We're taking that as evidence of the kill back to our village. The woman nodded and looked back down at the lifeless body. Even though her face was mostly expressionless, Naruto could tell she felt a wide range of emotions. "See, can you give us a moment?" the woman asked suddenly. Naruto raised an eyebrow and opened his mouth to ask her why. Shirsue's outstretched hand stopped him. "Sure thing," he said. "My associates and I will be outside of the building." Naruto turned his head to give his sensei a surprised look. "You think you might be able to find your way out once you're done with your moment?" The woman nodded. "I think I will," she said. Shirsue turned around and went for the door. "Come on, Naruto, we can search around the building while these ladies are busy," he said. Then he lowered his head next to Naruto's. "Pull all of your eyes out of this building." "Sensei?" Naruto questioned. "I don't want you to see what happens next," he said. "Just pull them all out, got it?" Naruto was confused by the request. But one look into Shirsue's eyes told him to listen. Naruto nodded his head. Once the group was outside, they would wait a long time before any of the women came outside. Town Hinata was smiling as she walked down the streets. Life had returned to Wave in full force. Seeing it now was a stark contrast from what it had been a couple of days ago. The people no longer had dead expressions on their faces. There were smiles everywhere she looked. Children were running around the streets, playing games. The street vendors, while not all occupied or fully stocked, were once again selling their wares. Logically, Hinata knew that much had to be done, and Wave had a long journey before it recovered. But Hinata had faith that it would and that people would prosper. Tazuna's bridge would help in that recovery. But for now, Hinata was content to see the people of Wave being happy and enjoying their newfound freedom. A pair of children ran up to her. "Hey, miss," one of them said, "a boy. You want to play with us?" The girl next to him shyly looked at her. Hinata smiled at the kids and knelt down. "I'm sorry," she said. "I can't right now. I got some things I need to get for my friends." At the downcast expressions of the children, Hinata felt a tug at her heart. "Don't be so sad. Tell you want the next time I'm in town, I'll play with the two of you." The kids brightened up at this. "Okay," the boy said with a wide goofy smile. Then the girl beside him tugged at his shoulder and whispered something into his ear. The boy nodded at her and looked at Hinata. "My friend here thinks you're very pretty." Hinata felt a burning blush covering her face. Thank you," she said. "And you're very pretty, too." The girl blushed but nodded. The boy smiled between them and grabbed the girl's hand. "Come on, let's go and play hide and seek," he said, dragging the girl with him. Both kids waved Hinata goodbye. Hinata stood up and breathed when she saw that the kids were gone. "You're quite good with kids." Hinata jumped and turned around to face the source of the voice. Tsunami smiled at her. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you." Hinata blinked and relaxed her posture. "I'm sorry, Tsunami-san," she said. "I didn't see you coming." Tsunami smiled at her. "No need to apologize, Kunoichi-san," she said. "I was just out getting some groceries when I saw you talking to those children." Hinata nodded and looked in the direction where the two kids had run off. "I'm just sorry I had to disappoint them." Tsunami let a small chuckle. "I'm sure they can handle it," she said. "Kids can be tougher than they appear," Hinata nodded, knowing that feeling all too well. "But you handle them quite well. I think you would be good with kids. I'm sure that'll make your friend very happy one day." Hinata nodded. She had always been good with kids and enjoyed being around them. Her brain caught up with the rest of Tsunami's statement. Hinata felt her face burning up. Hinata pressed her fingers together. "WH what?" She stammered out. And Naruto and I aren't. Her hand slammed over her mouth as she realized what she was going to say. Tsunami smiled at her and giggled. So, you do like him, she said. Hinata's face was getting hotter, any warmer, and she was sure they could use her face to boil an egg. It's not like that, she tried to say. She needed to clear up the misunderstanding. Except it wasn't a misunderstanding. We're not like that. She cursed her old stuttering habit for getting in the way. She wonders who she got it from. Back in Konoha, Hayashi sneezed. Back in Wave, Tsunami was smiling at the stuttering girl. Don't worry, I won't tell anyone, she said. Though I suspect everyone but the boy in question knows already. Hinata felt her shoulder relaxing, even though her face still felt hot. Really? She asked. Tsunami nodded to her. Hinata took a breath and waited for her face to cool down. Once it had cooled down enough, Hinata looked at Tsunami. Was it that obvious? She asked. Tsunami giggled. Very, she said. Like I said, I think everyone knows. Well, not everyone. Her smile grew just a bit wider. Hinata frowned. She knew who the woman was referring to. With so many eyes, and yet he never knows, Hinata thought. Which for the moment was fine with her. She was content to be his friend. A chuckle from Tsunami brought Hinata from her thoughts. I also suspect that it works both ways, she said. Hinata gave the woman a questioning look at the odd comment. What does that mean? She asked for clarity. Tsunami smiled and chuckled. Nothing, she said in a dismissive tone. Just an observation. Come on, how about we help each other get what we want? Hinata nodded. Thank you, Tsunami-san, she said. Now, no need to be so formal with me, Tsunami said. After all, you're one of the heroes of our country. I think you can drop the honorifics. Hinata was not quite sure about that. But she silently nodded and walked beside the woman. Together, they walked through the soon-to-be thriving streets. Tazuna's house. He's watching you again, Sasuke said. Sakura smiled. I know, she said. She saw young Inari hiding in the doorframe from the corner of her eye. There was a shy blush on the boy's face. He was watching them do the dishes, or rather, he was watching Sakura. I think somebody has got a crush, Sasuke said with a suggestive smile. Sakura could feel her cheeks burning. Now, don't be absorbed, she said. Besides, I'm too old for him. Not to say she wasn't flattered. Sasuke let out a snort. That won't stop him from having a crush on him, he said. Besides, not that I can blame him. First, you talked with him and sorted some things out, then saved him and his mother. Plus, you're also very pretty. No wonder he's fallen for you. Sakura gulped. Had Sasuke just called her? Sakura chased the thought away from her mind. My point still stands, she said. He's what, like 7 or 8? Sasuke shrugged. And I'm 13. Then, a smile spreads on Sakura's face. Besides, it's just a puppy crush, she said. She sent a side-eyed glance at the boy hiding behind the doorframe. There was a soft squeak in the air, followed by footsteps rapidly retreating away. Sakura shook her. Once we're gone, and things return to normal around here, he'll get on it and move on to the next girl. I can't imagine it will be that hard to find a girl. He did get the townspeople together. Sasuke snorted. Or maybe he'll hold on to it for a while, he said. He looked at Sakura. Not everyone gives up on their first crushes so easily. Sakura stopped doing the dishes for a second. So, this is what it was about. What a way to bring this subject up, she whispered under her breath. She pulled her hands out from the water and wiped them down. But not all of us dwell on them forever, she said. I haven't been stalking you for a while now, she admitted. Sasuke did not mask the surprise on his face. Wow, you actually admitted that, he said. Am I under a genjutsu, or is this one of Naruto's pranks? Sakura chuckled. Okay, she said. I get it. You didn't like the attention, so I stopped. Okay, maybe it wasn't quite like that. Sakura smiled. It is embarrassing then that I said it aloud. And probably more than a bit creepy. Sasuke gave her a deadpan stare. More than a bit creepy? He questioned. Sakura let out a huff. Alright, a lot creepy, she said, crossing her arms. What can I say? I was boy crazy. And you were the biggest thing around. So, of course, I had the biggest crush on you. Sasuke smiled at her. Last I checked, you were the president of my fan club, he said. Sakura snorted. Well, it's the former president now, she said. And if I had it in my power, I would disband that whole group. But you know how we fangirls are. Looking back at it now. Sakura would admit a lot of the stuff she did to grab Sasuke's attention was more than a bit embarrassing, not to mention more likely to drive him away. Best not to mention the toenail collection, she thought to herself. Note to self. Get rid of said collection at the earliest convenience. Sasuke snorted. You're telling me, he said. I swear I still find some of them hanging around in the shadows. Sakura started to chuckle. Well, not all of us can be like Hinata, she commented. That girl could stalk anyone and make it look cute. Mildly terrifying when you think about it. Wouldn't get any argument from me on that, Sasuke said. For a guy with a ton of floating eyeballs, Naruto sure does miss a lot. You think he's even aware that Hinata stalks him? Sakura shook her. I doubt it, she said. When it comes to Hinata, he's a little too dense about stuff like that. Probably thinks she's just practicing her stealth skills. Sasuke rolled his eyes. It's going to take him a long time to figure out that she's got a crush on him, he said. Actually, for that matter, it's taken her just as long to figure out he likes her back. Sakura snorted. Well, let's hope it won't take too long, she said. Ino is keen on being a bridesmaid for their wedding. Sakura was pretty keen on it, too, if she was to be honest. Sasuke looked at her. Do you really think those two will get together like that? He asked. Sakura gave the boy a deadpan stare. Sasuke, she said. Just look at those two and tell me you don't think they're meant to be. Sasuke was silent for a moment. Point taken, he said. Then, there was a long silence between the two. So why did you have a crush on me? Sasuke asked. Sakura was silent for a moment. Why are you asking now? She asked back. Sasuke shrugged his shoulders. Just curious, I guess, he said. So, was it because of all of the other fangirls or something else? Sakura was silent again. Sasuke, do you remember the first time we met? She asked as she ran her hand through her hair. Sasuke raised an eyebrow. Wasn't it on the first day of the academy? He said. I think it was during lunch. Sakura smiled. I guess you don't, she replied. Her tone came as something between wistful and bitter. Sasuke was staring at her. I take it that means we met before that? He asked. Sakura closed her eyes and nodded. Sasuke was silent for a second. Can you remind me? Sakura opened her eyes and looked at Sasuke. It was about 4 or 5 months before the academy started. I was playing in the park when the kids started to make fun of me. A frown flashed across Sasuke's face. What did they say? He asked. Sakura shrugged her shoulders. You know how kids can be, she said. Looking back at it now, none of it matters. They were just a bunch of childish taunts and jibs. But being a kid back then, I took them to heart. Sasuke nodded. So, what did they say? He asked. A lot of things, Sakura answered. But most of them were about my forehead. She placed her hand over her forehead. Sasuke was giving her a questioning look. Your forehead? He asked. Sakura nodded. Yeah, like big and ugly it was, she answered. They said you could cut fruit on it or even build a whole city on top of it. The sort of stuff that doesn't mean anything in the long run. But when you're a kid, hurtful things like mean a lot more. Sasuke nodded. I think I get it a little, he said. The period after the Uchiha betrayal wasn't a very smooth time for me or the other kids in the clan. Sakura nodded, she remembered the fallout after that event well. So, after some particularly bad words, I found myself crying in the park. At that time, Ino and I weren't friends yet, or rivals. Then this boy with black hair and onyx eyes walked up to me. Sasuke smiled. Did his hair happen to resemble a duck's tail? He asked. Sakura giggled. Maybe just a little, she said. But I thought it was cute. Anyway, he asked me why I was crying in the middle of the park. When I was done, I had half expected him to start making fun of me for the same reason the other kids did. Sasuke looked at her expectantly. So, what did I or he do? Sakura had a slight smile on her lips as the memory came back to her. I don't think that your forehead is big, she repeated the words. And I think you're a very pretty girl. Sakura suppressed a giggle when she saw Sasuke's cheeks turning red. So, he said that, he asked, rubbing the back of his head. Sakura smiled and shook her. I might be paraphrasing a little, she admitted. But it was what I needed to hear. It made me feel really happy. I didn't talk to you much that day because your mom called you away for something. When I went to my first day at the academy. I was so happy to see you there. But a little sad that you didn't recognize me. Oh, sorry about that. Sasuke. Sakura gave him a teasing smile. Oh, really, Sasuke? She said. You're sorry about forgetting about little old me? How many pink-haired girls did you meet to forget about me? Sasuke looked like he was at a loss for answers as Sakura looked at him for answers. After letting him squirm for a moment or two, Sakura decided to let him off easy. Well, at least you know who I am now. So, I'll let it slide. Sasuke let out a breath. So, is that why you like me so much? He asked. Sakura nodded. You were the first to say something like that, she said. Ino was the second, but you were the first person to comfort me like that. I guess I couldn't help but fall for you a little. Especially once I found out how nice and sweet you were. Sasuke said. But what about the whole fangirl thing? He asked. Where did that come from? Sakura started to scratch her cheek. I guess somewhere down the line, my crush on you became an obsession, she admitted. Looking back at it now, it was more than a bit embarrassing. There were so many girls that wanted to be with you, and the part of the village where I live had such good things to say about the Uchiha. I guess I caved into the pressure. I see, Sasuke said with a nod. So, what about now? The others seem to think that you're over your crush on me. Are you? Sakura was silent for a while as she thought it over. Was she over her crush or obsession with Sasuke? If she was to be honest with herself, she couldn't say. I'm not really sure, she admitted. I don't think something like that is something you can simply get over. Sasuke looked at her with a hard stare. Okay, you're sure about it, he said. So, let me put it another way. Would you be upset if I started to date someone? Someone who wasn't you. For a moment, Sakura felt a tugging at her heart. Kumo, you mean? She asked. You know about that? Sasuke asked. Sakura nodded. How could I not? She replied. Anyone with eyes can see the way you look at her. Even Naruto can see it, and we all know how dense he is. Sasuke snorted. Alright, you got me there, he said. I like her. Kumo is nice. Sakura nodded, and then she sighed. I'll admit I would be lying if I said I wasn't jealous of her. She is the only girl that seems to have gotten through to you. We all wanted to be that girl. Sasuke rubbed the back of his head. Well, I wouldn't go that far, he said. But I did ask her out on a date before we left. He looked at Sakura with a weary expression. Sakura was smiling, but it was obvious that it was not a happy one. I'm happy for you, she said. It hurt saying it. As much as she wished it were her, deep down, she was happy for Sasuke and Kumo. Look, it is none of my business if you and Kumo are dating. But if she makes you happy, then I'm all right with it. Sasuke was still looking at her. Thank you, he said. And for what it's worth. I am sorry, you are a nice girl. But Kumo is just. Sakura cut him off. I know, she said. She's something special to you. Plus, I imagine the whole fangirl thing was a big turn-off to you. So, really, it's my own fault. So, just be happy with her, okay? Sasuke smiled and nodded. Thank you, he said. And I will. Sakura smiled back at him. Then, a mischievous glint appeared in her eyes. That said, she said in a sweet voice. This goes without saying, but if you do anything to break her heart. Or Kami forbids anything that makes her uncomfortable. She raised a fist into the air. We girls might have disagreements, but we close ranks fast. You understand? Sasuke had a nervous smile on his face as he nodded. Perfectly, he said. Sakura smiled as her eyes went down to the floor. But I am happy for you, Sasuke-kun, she said. I'm sure you will make a great couple. Thank you, Sakura, Sasuke said. And for what it's worth, I am sorry. I'm sure that there's someone out there for you. I know someone as smart and pretty as you can find a special guy. Sakura let out a small snort. Maybe, she said. But not anytime soon. Right now, I want to focus on my career as a kunoichi. Besides, who says that a girl needs to have a guy at her side, or anyone really? Being single, from what I hear, can have its benefits. Sasuke smiled. Well, whatever happens, I hope you'll find happiness, he said. I think that's something everyone deserves. The next day, I think that's everything sorted, Shisui said, looking through a pile of papers. The Konohanin and Zabuza were going through everything Gato had owned on the island. Namely, the assets and wealth he brought over to Wave. Which was not a small amount. It looks like Gato was doing more than terrorizing Wave, Naruto said as he looked at some of the papers. There was a lot of it Naruto did not understand, too many unfamiliar words and numbers that were hard to keep track of. But he did have a good idea of what the deceased businessman was trying to do. I think he was looking to settle here and make it into his own country. Or at least make Wave a major hub of his criminal activities. There were a lot of request ions forms in the piles, along with transfers of assets from across the elemental nations. A lot of them. Gato had been looking to transfer a large sum of his wealth to Wave. Shisui nodded as he looked at a sheet of paper. I think you might be onto something there, he said. Gato does strike as the type who would want a whole country to himself. Even one as poor as Wave. Of course, we'll never know the extent of his plans now. From across the table, Zabuza snorted. It wouldn't have mattered either way, he said, not with me and Haku on his payroll. There was a twisted smile under those face wrappings. Naruto just knew it. Good thing we got to him first, Naruto whispered to Shisui. Shisui nodded. Then he looked back at Zabuza. So, then, he said. Now that we've taken stock of everything that Gato had on Wave, will our original deal do? 15% will go to you. 35% to the people of Wave and the rest to us? Zabuza was rubbing his chin. I still say I should get a larger share, he said. And why is this pathetic little country getting a third of what the guy had? They didn't do anything. Because they need all that help they can get, Shisui explained. Gato had this country on a stranglehold for more than a year. That sort of damage can't be undone in a night. Zabuza rolled his eyes. So, what? He asked. They'll have that little bridge of theirs. Shisui nodded. Perhaps so, he said. But even with the bridge connecting Wave to the mainland, it will still take Wave a long time to recover. The portion of Gato's wealth they'll get will go a long way for that. Zabuza still did not look happy about it. Naruto frowned. Oh, come on, Naruto said. Can't you just be satisfied with what you got? You didn't even get to kill the guy, and we're still giving you 15% of his stuff. Zabuza glared at Naruto. Careful of what you say, Gaki, he growled. You do remember who you are talking to. Zabuza-sama, Haku tried to interject. Yeah, I know, Naruto said, waving his hand. The demon of the bloody mist or whatever. More like the wind baby of the mist. With the way you complain. Naruto saw Zabuza's hand reflexively going for his blade. He stopped himself but still had an angry glare directed at Naruto. I could have killed Gato at any time and have gone with all of his wealth. And yet you didn't, Naruto pointed out. Then he turned his head to face Haku, who stood next to Zabuza. She was looking between the two with a worried face. And don't you mean we? We? Zabuza said, raising a non-existent eyebrow. Naruto nodded and gestured to Haku. Yeah, we. He stated. What about Haku here? Isn't she supposed to be your partner or something? Shouldn't she be included in this conversation? And Naruto, I appreciate what you are doing here, Haku said. But. Zabuza cut her off. Partner? Zabuza questioned with mirth in his voice. Don't try to make me laugh. She's not my partner. Naruto's frown deepened. So, what is she then? He asked. Your apprentice? A friend, family? Does she mean anything to you? Naruto, I think that will be enough, Shisui said. This is not the time or place for it. Naruto kept his head facing Zabuza when he spoke. No, Shisui-sensei, I'm sorry. But I think this has to be said. So, what is Haku to you, Zabuza? What is she to you? Zabuza snorted. What does it matter? He asked. This has no bearing on our talks here. So, why should I answer your question? Because it's important, Naruto said. In all our talks, you never once spoke about Haku or even asked what she wants out of this. Come to think of it, I don't think I ever saw you give her one kind word. So, what is she, a partner, a friend? What about just being an acquaintance to you? Everyone looked at Zabuza expectantly. Even Haku was giving him a side eye. Zabuza crossed his arms. Partner might be a good word, he said. But tool would be better. Never before had Naruto wanted to punch somebody so badly in his life. Especially when he saw the look of hurt on Haku's face. A tool? Naruto repeated. That's all you think of her? Just a tool? Zabuza gave him a snort. She's a shinobi, he said like it was all the defense he needed. All shinobi are tools. Whether it be for their Kage or for their client. Naruto glared at Zabuza. So, does that make you a tool, too, he said. Zabuza smiled under his face wrappings. Only for those who pay me enough, he said. Otherwise, I am my own master. And Haku just remains as a tool, Naruto said. He is a part of his focus on Haku. Even though she was keeping a passive expression on her face, Naruto could tell she was upset. Zabuza snorted. It's her role in life, he said. If she wanted to be something more, she would have left by now. She's a human being, Naruto said. You can't just treat her like she's some tool you can use as you please, a terrible thought crossed Naruto's mind. Or to be discarded when she's not useful anymore. At this, Haku stiffened. Zabuza-sama, she said. I think I'll step outside for a moment. Get some fresh air. She bowed to the man. Zabuza looked at her for a moment, then nodded his head. Go ahead, he said as he turned his attention back to Naruto. I'll probably be right behind you if this gaki keeps talking. Haku nodded, and briefly, she looked at Naruto. There was a look in her expression that Naruto could not quite read right. Then she was out of the room and almost everyone's sight. Except for Naruto, he kept watching her as she made her way out of the building. Naruto turned his head at Zabuza, directing a glare at him. You're really full of it, you know that? He said. Do you have any idea what she thinks of you? How much she looks up to you? Again, Zabuza did not look impressed. So, what? He said. If she can't take some simple words, then what do I care? Naruto shook his head. I don't get how someone like her can follow a man like you, he said. Haku is a kind, wonderful person, and Naruto paused as he searched for the right words. The demon of the bloody mist, Zabuza so helpfully supplied. Naruto wanted to shoot him with a chakra beam right now. But he restrained himself. Yes, that, he said. Sums up everything about you. You're a terrible, bloody-thirsty sociopath. How is it that Haku cares so much for you? How can you not care about her? Zabuza shrugged his shoulders. I don't really, he said, placing his hands behind his head. Then Naruto surprised himself when he smiled. It was a sad, bitter smile, but it still surprised him that he could do it during the given circumstances. Funny thing is, I think you do care, he said. Now that got a reaction out of Zabuza, he removed his hands from the back of his head and leaned on the table. I don't know how long you've been with her. But something tells me it's been a long time. In all that time, some part of you must have grown to care about her. Zabuza was looking at him with a blank expression. Gaki, he said in a low voice. You should know as well as I do. That as a shinobi, we're supposed to kill our emotions, Naruto finished. Do what is necessary to complete the mission, even if that means going whatever moral code you have. I know about all that stuff, Naruto shook his head. The thing is, I don't know how that is possible. Because at the end of the day, I believe that we're still human. We can't just kill our emotions like that, he snapped his fingers. Not unless you are true. Some inhuman monster and Zabuza. Despite your claims to being a demon, I think you're still human enough under there. Gaki, you don't know the things I am capable of, he said. And what I've already done. What makes you think any part of that is human? What makes you think that I give a damn about that girl? Naruto's smile grew. Because human beings can do terrible things, he said. We just try to hide it behind things like demons and monsters. Then, every eye in the room directed its gaze at Zabuza. The former Mistnin sensed the gazes directed at him as he looked around the room. But still we care, we still love, and laugh, and cry. We still have our emotions, our feelings. Zabuza, I feel sorry for you. I think you do care for Haku. She's been the only source of company you've had for a long time. You've seen how kind and gentle she is. And you must have seen how much she loves you. But you don't see that, and I'm afraid you won't until it's too late. Naruto stood up and walked away from the table. "Shursui-sensei," he said. "I think I'll be stepping out for a moment to clear some air." Then he was gone. Zabuza barely restrained his anger as the brat walked out of the room. The moment the blonde-haired child was out of the room, Zabuza slammed his fist into the table. "Damn that, Gaki," he shouted. "Where does he get off saying shit like that?" A chuckle in the room caught his attention. He looked at the Uchiha Jonin, smiling at him. Please forgive Naruto," he said. "He can be quite a passionate young man. Even though he is a shinobi, and he has seen some stuff. He is still naive to some of the ways of the world." Zabuza snorted. "More like a damn fool," he said. "Where did that Gaki get the idea that he cared about Haku? That Zabuza was still human? Kami, damn it. He was Zabuza, the demon of the bloody mist. One does not get a name like that by being a saint. There was no way he cared about that little girl he had taken under his wing when she was starving on the street, cold and very alone. He had only taken her in on a whim and nothing more. It was just by happenstance that she became such a valuable tool to him. It was nothing more than that." Shursui's smile grew. "Maybe he is," he said with a shrug. "But he does have a way with words. Clearly had an effect on you." Zabuza narrowed his eyes at Shursui. "And what is that supposed to mean?" he asked. "Where is all Konohanin crazy? Or had he had the misfortune to have met the village's oddballs?" "Just something to think about," Shursui said. "Now then, I think we have a little more to discuss about Gato's possessions." Zabuza nodded. He wanted something to get his mind off what the blonde Gaki said. But try as he reasons, he could not shake his mind off it. Lake-in Wave Haku let out a breath as she looked up at the sky. Night was quickly approaching. Had she been out that long? Or had the meeting with the Konohanin gone on that long? Haku wasn't sure if she wanted to. "No, either way. She's a tool to me and nothing more." Haku had always known the truth, and she accepted that. Zabuza was her master and the man who had given her a purpose in life. She had devoted her whole life to Zabuza. She could accept that. But to hear it from the man himself? It had hurt her more than she had thought it would. She knew it was the way he looked at her. But it still hurt her. Haku looked at her reflection in the lake water and pondered something. What did she see looking at her own reflection? Did she see a tool waiting to be used by its master? Did she see a young woman with a gentle face and a kind heart? Or did she see that scared little girl Zabuza had first met, the little one who had lost everything and was waiting to die? Honestly, it was hard for Haku to tell. She reached her hand to the water and channeled a bit of chakra to her fingertips. A moment later, the water at the edges of her touch froze over, creating a reflective surface. "That's a nice power you have there," a voice said behind her. Instinctively, Haku whirled around, pulling her sunban out. Then her mind caught up with her, and she lowered her weapons. "You know it's not polite to sneak up on someone like that," she said. Naruto smiled and walked up beside her. "That's a little strange coming from you," he said. "Considering the way we met." Haku smiled and put her sunban away. "Point taken," she said. She turned around to look back at the icy reflection of her face. She felt Naruto sitting down next to her. "That is a neat power you have," he said. "A Genkei Kekiai?" Haku nodded. "The Hayatan," she said. "The power to make ice and control it. It works as a combination of water and wind chakras." Naruto nodded. "It must be nice being able to do something like that," he said. A pair of eyes float down to his hands. "All I got are these eyes." Haku looked at those eyes. She knew more were floating around, and she had seen them before, even destroyed a few. But this was the first time she had gotten a close look at them. They were a light shade of brown, she noticed. She wondered who they had belonged to. Not everyone appreciates powers like mine, she said. Some even think they are a curse. Naruto was silent for a second. The bloodline purges in Kiri, he said. He got a nod from Haku. Must have been scary to have lived through a time like that. Always scared of what would happen if you were caught. Haku felt a sad smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Actually, I didn't always live in fear, she said. There was a time when I didn't even know I had these powers. I was much happier back then. Haku looked at Naruto. He was giving her an expectant look, and the eyes in his hands were now looking at her. So, what happened? Haku looked back at her reflection in the ice. She could almost see her life playing out in the reflection. I found out I had special powers, she said. A little girl playing with the water. When suddenly, some of it turned to ice. Excited by what she had done and unaware of the consequences, the little girl showed her mother. The first person I showed was my mother. I had expected her to be excited like I was. I could do something special. I thought she would be happy for me. She wasn't, though. Instead of smiling at Haku, her mother had an expression she had never seen before on her face, a look of dread. My mother was like me, Haku explained. She was one of the last survivors of the Yuki clan from the Hayaton came from. My mother was scared when she found I had inherited the clan's Genkai Kekkei. The harsh scolding she had received from her mother had been burned into her mind that day. She told me that under no circumstance was I reveal that I had these special powers. Not to anyone, not even to father. But what they could not have known was they were being watched. But my father still found out about my gifts. Tears streamed down Haku's face. In the image, she saw that terrible day clearly. She had been returning home from a long day on her family's farm. She had been expecting to return to a happy family. Not a bloody massacre and the mob standing over her mother's family. Her father had been at the mob's lead with tears in his eyes. He killed my mother and was about to kill me as well. The reflection fog over as icicles stained in red appeared. I don't remember everything that happened after. But I do remember what I saw after. Naruto had a blank expression on his face. But Haku could make a guess on what he was thinking. That's horrible, he said. He looked out at the lake. I can't imagine losing my parents like that. Haku smiled. You're lucky to have your parents still, she said. It must be nice to have a loving family like yours. Naruto frowned. Actually, I don't know my parents, he said. Haku looked at Naruto, surprised by his admission. They both died on the day I was born. Now Haku understood why Naruto was so kind to her. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't know. Naruto smiled and looked up at the sky. Don't be, he said. I'm proud of what they did that day for me and the village. Haku suspected there was a story there, but she would ask about that later. After that, everything is a bit of a blur for me, she said. Day from the day was just a struggle for survival. No one wanted an orphan on the streets. Sometimes, I even fought stray dogs for food scraps in trash bins. Naruto was looking at her with a sympathetic expression. It was like he knew what it was like to go through that. It was a thought Haku did not want to entertain. I guess that's when Zabuza came in, he said. A frown was tugging at the edges of his lips. Haku nodded. He found me wandering on the streets, she explained. I don't know why he was there that day or why he stopped to look at me. But I knew one thing was for certain when I looked him in the eyes. Naruto raised an eyebrow. And what's that? He asked. His eyes were like mine, Haku answered. They were the eyes of someone alone in this world. He took me in that day. He taught me everything I know, how to live, how to fight. He taught you to be his perfect tool, Naruto said. Haku heard the bitterness in his voice. Haku shrugged. It was not anything she hadn't expected. She knew what Zabuza was like and how their relationship looked. I know what you are thinking, she told the blindfolded boy. Zabuza is not a, she paused and chuckled. She really couldn't say that he wasn't a bad man, could she? Naruto nodded and stood up. Look, I get it, he said. You care a lot about him. He saved your life, and you feel like you owe him. He did more than just save her life. I think he cares about me, too, Haku said. Just in his own way. Again, Naruto nodded. I think you deserve better, he said. Zabuza might have saved you and might have given your life purpose. But someone like you deserves so much more. It's cruel how life dealt with somebody as kind and gentle as you are. Haku smiled and rubbed a hand through her hair. Thank you, she said. You're the first person to say something like that. Naruto had his head facing Haku. Well, that's because it's true, he said. Then, his face adopted a thoughtful expression. You know, back in my home village, Konoha. You would be welcomed there, they love their Genkei Kekkei. They would jump at the chance to have someone like you. Haku's smile grew as she looked back at the lake. The ice mirror was melting away now. Without an extra infusion of chakra, it would be gone by sunrise. It's a kind offer, she said. But I don't think I can ever leave Zabuza's side. She could never picture her life without Zabuza in it. He was the only thing that mattered to her, the only thing that kept her going. If something were to happen to him. Haku shoved that thought aside. She didn't want to let it run its natural course. I guess there's no way to talk you into it? Naruto asked. His head was facing out to look at the lake. Haku shook her head. Naruto kept a blank expression on his face. It was worth a shot. But you deserve to be happy, we all do. He turned around and started to walk away. Haku continued to look at the melting reflection in the ice. Unknown to her and Naruto, someone had watched their exchange. Bridge it had taken them a month, but now, finally, the bridge between Wave and the mainland was complete. The last slab of concrete had been placed 2 days ago, leading to a day of celebration for the people of Wave. Now, the members of Teams 8 and 11, along with 2 extras, will be among the first to cross the completed bridge. Naruto had to say he was extremely impressed with what Tazuna had done. Naruto didn't know much about bridges or hadn't seen that many in his life. But he knew the one that he had made was a marvel. Tazuna had truly lived up to his self-professed title of Super Bridge Builder. Not that Naruto would admit it. To the man, it would go straight to his ego. The whole town had seemingly gathered to see the shinobi off. Naruto had his eyes out so he could see everything. Sakura was consoling a crying Inari. Shursui was talking to Kurenai. The genin of the 2 teams were gathered together, having their own conversation. So, how does it feel to complete your first C rank? Sasuke said. Or is it a B rank now? Kiba shrugged his shoulders. Honestly, I don't know, he said. On both questions. I mean, it was our first real mission. Not any of those baby chores they had us doing back in the village. So, it's kind of exciting. Sasuke nodded. I felt the same when we got our first C rank, he said. Sure, it was a simple delivery mission. But it was the first time we got out of the village. But it was something new and different. Kiba nodded. Same here, he said. Then everything else happened, and suddenly, our first C rank became the first B rank. Maybe even higher than that. Now that didn't happen with our first C rank, Sasuke said. Just a run-in with some bandits at the end. That's how we got our first kills. Kiba nodded. Yeah, I remember you 3 being down in dumps for a while after that, he said. And you did have the smell of blood on you. I was honestly worried. Both Naruto and Sasuke looked at Kiba in surprise. What? He said, looking between the two. Wait, you could smell the blood on us? Naruto asked. Kiba looked confused. Well, duh, he pointed to his nose. Did you forget I'm an Inuzuka? Our noses are stronger than most humans. That was a fair point, Naruto conceded. Though now, Naruto had to wonder just how good the senses of an Inuzuka were. Okay, so that's one question, Sasuke said. But how would you know what blood smells like? Now, that was an answer that Naruto already had. His clan does run a kennel, he said. So, it makes sense that Kiba might have been exposed to blood before. Kiba smiled. That, and well, he trailed off for a second. You do remember I have a mom and a sister, right? Why would that matter? Sasuke paused mid-sentence. Oh, he said. Right. The boys shuffled quietly as an awkwardness fell over the group. That awkwardness was short as the rest of the traveling group gathered together. Everyone, it's time to leave, Shisui said with Kurenai standing beside him. It's time we got back home and reported the successful completion of our mission. Both of our missions, Kurenai said. Then, a smile spread across her face. Not looking forward to explaining this to the Hokage. Shisui chuckled. He wasn't particularly happy about your decision, he said. But I think he understands why you did it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have sent us to help. No, he would have sent you to drag me back to the village to explain myself, Kurenai said. Which I still will have to do. Don't worry, Kurenai-sensei, Kiba said. We'll be there to defend you. Sakura nodded. Kiba's. Right, she said. We're the ones that talked you into continuing the mission. So, if you get punished for it, we should face it too. Shino nodded. Besides, he said. Logically speaking, the results of our mission should prove that your decision, while made on an emotional whim, was correct. Kurenai smiled at her genin. Thank you, guys, she said. But I think I can handle it myself. But, Sakura started. Her sensei cut her off. Don't worry about it, Kurenai said. I've gotten myself into tough spots with the Hokage before. I can get myself out. The genin of Team 8 looked like they wanted to say more. However, they remained silent. Shisui smiled and looked at his genin. Now, I hope you three would be willing to do the same for me, he said. What bail you out of trouble for a stupid mistake you made? Naruto said. He looked at his teammates. I don't know, that would deepen on what you did. If it's something like this, we'll help you. For the right price, Sasuke added with a smile. Hinata giggled. Shisui gave his genin a deadpan stare. And if it's something else? He asked. Like what? Naruto said with a devious smile. Destroying Gigi's favorite collection of books. In which case, I'm sorry, Shisui-sensei, but you're on your own on that one. At this, Shisui paled, getting giggles from Sasuke and Hinata as Naruto's smile broadened. Then, a smile spread across Shisui's face. Well, you won't have to worry about getting yourselves involved then, he said. He looked at them like a cat at a mouse before the kill. I'll leave evidence behind that you helped me. Naruto ignored the cold chill that went down his spine. He did get a laugh from the looks on Hinata's and Sasuke's faces. Alright, fair enough, he said. Don't, Shisui, we'll be there to help you. A team has to stick together. Right guys? He turned his head to face Sasuke and Hinata. They each nodded. Shisui nodded. Well, it's nice to know you guys will have my back, he said. Then Naruto turned his attention to Zabuza and Haku. So, I guess we'll be traveling with you too? He asked. At least until we get to the end of the bridge. Or wherever you want to part ways with us. Naruto didn't enjoy having to part ways with the two, especially when Haku would be left with Zabuza. Haku smiled at him. "It's okay, Naruto-san," she said. "I'm sure we'll meet again. Though hopefully under better circumstances." Naruto noticed that Zabuza closed his eyes and seemed to mutter something under his breath. "About that," he said, uncrossing his arms. "Haku, you'll be going with the Konoha." Everyone looked at Zabuza in stunned silence. "Why you mean we'll be going with the Konoha?" Haku said in a shaky voice. "Like we'll part with them at the border, or," she trailed off. "Perhaps go with them to their village?" Zabuza snorted. "Kami, no," he said. "If I step one foot in that village, they'll have me in a cell. Ready to be shipped back to Kiri, or worse." "No, Haku. You'll go to Konoha with your new friends." "Kurama, are you hearing this?" he asked the Kyuubi. "Or am I dreaming?" "Afraid not, Kit," Kurama said. "You're perfectly sane. Or as sane as any Uzumaki can get." Naruto was not the only one having a hard time believing what Zabuza said. "But why Zabuza-sama?" Haku asked the swordsman. "Why are you abandoning me like this? Did I fail you in some way? Did I offend you? Am I no longer of use to you?" The expression on Haku's face was unmistakable, fear. But the look on Zabuza's face shocked Naruto the most. Zabuza had a soft expression on his face. "Haku," he said. "You have always been my useful tool. Never once have you failed me. Never once had you complained about the methods I use. You have been my most trusted companion." Naruto looked at his teammates and members of Team 8, they exchanged uncertain glances. "Then why are you leaving me?" Haku asked. "Haven't I proved to be worthy of you?" Zabuza shook his head. "You have never been a disappointment to me," he said. "From the moment I met you, I molded you into the perfect tool for my ambitions. But you are more than just a tool," he looked at Naruto. Another expression Naruto did not think he would see on that man's face was respect. Haku looked between Zabuza and Naruto with a confused expression. "Zabuza-sama," she said. "It is time you pursued your own ambitions," Zabuza said. "As for me, I think it's time I went home. The civil war there has been over for a few years now, with the rebels taking control." "Then let me come with you," Haku pleaded with Zabuza. Zabuza would have none of it. "No," he said flatly. "The war might be over. But there is still a lot of bad blood with people like you. You will be safer in Konoha. They love their Genkai Kekii users there." Shursui walked up to the pair and placed a hand on Haku's shoulder. "She will be treated well back at Konoha," he said. "You have my word on that." "You better," Zabuza said. "Otherwise, I will hunt each and every one of you." He gave everyone from Konoha a sharp glare that sent shivers down their spines. Naruto made a mental note never to piss the man off. "But Zabuza-sama," Haku said. "What will I do without you? I can't just leave you now." Zabuza shrugged his shoulders. "That's for you to decide," he said. He walked past the distressed Kunoichi. "Haku, it's time you started to live for yourself and decide what you want from this life. If you can't do it for yourself, then do it for me." He turned his head to look at Haku. "Live your own life, Haku." Haku wanted to say more. However, before she could get anything out, Zabuza started walking away. Naruto looked on in surprise as the whole thing unfolded. That was unexpected. The rest of their goodbyes in Wave were not as dramatic. On the way home night had fallen since then, and without Tazuna to slow them down, the shinobi could cover a considerable ground on their way back to Konoha. According to Shursui, if they kept this pace up, they would make it back to Konoha in 3 more days. They would also be parting ways with Zabuza sometime in the morning as they got closer to Fire Country. It was a little after dinner, and when most everyone was asleep, Naruto found Haku sitting alone a short distance from the camp. It was pretty easy to tell that the young woman was still upset from the day's events, evidenced from the tears on her face. Naruto approached the woman and sat down next to her. Haku stiffened, and Naruto saw her reaching for her weapon's pouch on reflex. Then she relaxed when she recognized him. "Is something the matter?" she said in a tone that said she wanted to be alone right now. Naruto wasn't going to give her that. "Just checking on a friend," he said. "Well, I'm fine," she said. The crack in her voice said otherwise. "Then I guess we can just talk," he said with a smile. Then he got a serious expression on his face. "Look, I know you're upset by all of this. You probably feel abandoned by your master. You're thinking that you failed him in some way, and now he's tossing you aside. But honestly, I think this might be the best thing for you." An angry frown flashed across the woman's face. "And what would you know about that?" she asked in a raised voice. Then, a regretful expression washed over her as she saw the hurt look on Naruto. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. Despite feeling hurt by what Haku said, Naruto did not let it get to him. "Don't apologize," he said. "I know it's a lot to take in, and so suddenly. Trust me, I'm more than a bit surprised, too." Haku nodded and looked out across the forest. "I don't get it," she said. "I've served him faithfully for years. Ever since he found me on the streets, I have done everything he has asked. I've molded myself to be his perfect tool." Naruto frowned. There it was again, more of that tool talk. "So, why is he abandoning me now?" Naruto shook his head. "It's because you are not a tool," he said. "Didn't you listen to what he was saying? You're a living, breathing human being with her own thoughts and emotions. I think it's time that you realized that." Haku wiped her head around to face Naruto. "What are you saying?" she asked. Naruto got comfortable on the ground. He had a feeling this could take a while. Because despite how he acts, he started. "I think Zabuza cares about you, and he thinks this is what's best for you." Haku tilted her head to the side. "What's best for me?" she asked. Naruto nodded. "Look, there is no denying what your master is," Naruto said. "Zabuza is a bloody thirsty psychopath. He's the demon of the bloody mist, for fuck's sake, and he likes being called that. What man in his right mind likes being called a demon?" Naruto withered the intense glare from Haku. Then, it softened after a second, and she looked away. "I won't deny his faults," she said with some hesitation. Naruto nodded. He was glad they were getting somewhere here. But despite all his proclamations of being a demon, Zabuza is still a human being deep down, and I think you might have managed to get to that part of him, though not without help from a certain handsome blonde. Haku smiled as she looked across the forest. "I know that," she said. "From the day I met him, I knew he was human. Others might have seen the demon, but I saw the man behind the demon. He doesn't show it often but has always treated me well. Better than he could have." Naruto nodded. "Which is why I think he's letting you go now," he said. "Zabuza knows the kind of path he is on and where it will lead him. He doesn't want to drag you down with him." Haku was silent for what felt like an eternity. "But I would gladly follow him down that path," she said. "If he asked me." Naruto kept the frown off his face. "Which is why he didn't ask you," he said. He stood up. "Haku, it's time you started making choices for yourself. Zabuza has set you free. It's your life now. You don't have to go with us to Konoha. But you don't have to follow Zabuza back to Kiri either." Haku was silent when Naruto left her. Zabuza felt the other presence before he heard their voice. "You know, I am a little surprised." Zabuza opened his eyes and glanced at the Uchiha Jonin as he stepped beside him. "About what?" he asked. His watch was about to end, so he figured the Uchiha was here to swap him out. The attempt at conversation was not expected. That you would be returning to Kiri alone, Shursui said. Or even that you would return to your old home at all. Rebels or not, it's still risky for you to return. Zabuza shrugged his shoulders. So, what? He said. I'd figure they would be desperate for all the help they can get. It wasn't a bad excuse. Between the civil war and the bloodline purges, Kiri was left in a severely weak state. It was at risk of losing its position as one of the great 5 hidden villages. Shursui nodded. Perhaps, he said. But how certain are you that the new village government will welcome you back? They could just as easily kill you as they would welcome you into the fold. As much as Zabuza hated to admit it, the Uchiha had a point. It was risky returning to Kiri, even with the new village government. So, why risk it? Why not just stay as a Nukenin and keep Haku around? But still we care, we still love, and laugh, and cry. We still have our emotions, our feelings. Zabuza, I feel sorry for you. I think you do care for Haku. She's been the only source of company you've had for a long time. You've seen how kind and gentle she is. And you must have seen how much she loves you. But you don't see that, and I'm afraid you won't until it's too late. A flash of memory appeared in the former Kirinin's mind. A man traveling on a road alone. His ambitions for the future failed, and everything he had gone until he met an alone child, a girl whose eyes were like his. A flash of a smile and all the times they had spent together. Zabuza was making fists with his hands. He could almost hear the smile on the Uchiha's face. I see that my student's words got to you, he said. Zabuza snorted. His words cut deep, he said. Deeper than any kunai can cut. He might think that there is some humanity in me, and perhaps he might be right. But he wasn't about to admit that. But he is wrong. I am a demon through and through. My path is blood-soaked, and there is only one way for that to end. Zabuza looked up at the night sky. He felt something coming down his cheeks. Were those tears? Zabuza chuckled. He did not think he had been capable of those for a long time. But Haku is different, he said. If she were to die tomorrow, I know she would end up in a very different place than where I would go. Shursui nodded. So, you don't want to drag her down with you, he said. She's a pure soul, which is rare in our world. Particularly in the life of a shinobi. I'm surprised she has survived as long as she has under you. Zabuza nodded. She's a survivor, he said. It was one of the reasons he took Haku under his wing. He could see it in her eyes. But she would follow even if lead to the fires, Shursui said. Loyalty like that is rare and dangerous. Again, Zabuza nodded. Which is why I told her not to follow me, he said. She would do anything I say. Even if it leads to the fires, as you put it. Shursui nodded. You think she'll do as you say now? You basically just abandoned he and told her to get lost. Don't you think she could disobey you and follow you to Kiri regardless? Zabuza shrugged. Then I will deal with it, he said. I might have taught her everything she knows. But I have not taught her everything she knows. She'll never catch sight of me again. I see, Shursui said, looking at the camp. He noticed the aforementioned girl returning to her tent. That brings me back around to my other question. What will you do if Kiri decides they don't want you? What then? Again, Zabuza shrugged. I'll deal with it, he said. A couple of good swings from Kubikuribocho should convince the blockheads. Then, a smile spreads across his face. Besides, the current Mizukage is an old friend of mine. He wondered if Mei was still as good as she used to be. Kami knew it had been a while since Zabuza had laid with a good woman. The Uchiha gave him a funny look. He looked like he wanted to ask more, but then had thought better of it as he shook his head. Don't need to know, he said. Then he rubbed his chin. I think I might have an idea that could help you. Now, Zabuza was intrigued. Go on, he said. Gato did not have all of his wealth on Wave, Shursui explained. From the documents we procured, he had quite a few offshore sites. Warehouses full of goods and wealth. He pulled out a scroll. Zabuza eyed it carefully. When my team returns to Konoha, I was going to suggest to the Hokage that an investigation be set up. But something like that could take a while. Gato had assets spread across several countries, he smiled. I would not be surprised that some of the warehouses will be emptied by the time we get around to it. Probably former employees taking their cut of the pie. Zabuza smiled as he took the scroll. You know what, he said. I think you might be right. With Gato out of the picture, I would not be surprised if some of his men would help themselves to what he left behind. They could make off with a lot of money, Shursui said. Perhaps enough to make a bargain with Kiri. Zabuza nodded, then his eyes narrowed. So, what's the catch here, he said as he pocketed the scroll. While I would not put it past you tree huggers. I know you are not helping me out of the kindness of your heart. The Uchiha Jonin had a glint in his eyes. Simple, he said. We want an alliance with Kiri. Konoha, is that it? Haku asked. Her eyes showed a glint of wonder as the group approached the village walls. Naruto smiled. Sure is, he said. He already had his eyes spreading back throughout the village, checking up on everyone important to him. He is relieved to see they are all okay, though he did notice that Team 9 was missing. Maybe they were on a mission? They're so big, Haku said. I don't think even Kiri had something like this. Sakura nodded. Actually, the walls around Konoha and their gates are considered one of the wonders of the modern world, she said. Which makes one of two that our village has. Can you guess what the other? I'm staring at it now, Haku said. She was staring at the four faces carved into the mountain that oversaw the village. The Hokage monument. Sakura nodded. That's right, she said as she rubbed a hand through her hair. The faces of the Hokages have been carved into the mountain. It's as though they are all watching over us. Naruto nodded. And one day, he said as his gaze turned to face the mountain. My face will be up there. Haku nodded as she continued to stare back at the village that would soon become her home. Zabuza-sama, is this what you really want? Hokage Tower Sarutobi rubbed the bridge of his nose, already feeling the beginnings of a headache. Teams 8 and 11 had returned from their shared mission. They had reported success on both fronts. That was fine, even if it meant having to deal with the paperwork required to upgrade a C-rank mission to a B rank, which he could deal with. It was the other issue that would be a little trickier to handle. He turned his attention to the young woman standing amid the two genin teams. She had a nervous but respectful smile on her face. The old Hokage sighed and took a deep breath. I'm getting too old for this, he thought, making a mental note to convince Jiraiya or Tsunade to take up the hat. So, let me get this straight, he said, eyeing each member of the genin teams. His eyes lingered on Kurenai for a second longer than the others. Shortly after the assassination of Gato, you were able to resolve the conflict. With Zabuza and his accomplice Haku, he glanced at the aforementioned girl. Correct? Shursui and Kurenai both nodded. Yes, Sandame-sama, the former said. With their client dead and evidence showing he intended to betray them. The pair had no reason to engage us in further conflict. Sarutobi nodded. That much of the report made sense to him. Most shinobi preferred to avoid conflict on their missions. Normal missions were hard enough without the interference of other shinobi. So, when presented with the option between fighting another shinobi or finding some way around it, the latter was the preferred option. After all, fights between shinobi were not the stealthiest thing about them. So, Hiruzen could see why his shinobi chose to end the fight with Zabuza once Gato was dead. The other parts of the report made him a little nervous. After which you decided to work with your former enemies, he noticed the slight tense of the Yuki girl. To clear out the rest of Gato's men from his hideout and the nearby docks. Then, divide the spoils between yourselves and the people of Wave. Do I have that right? Again, the Jonin present nodded their heads. The genin remained silent but was starting to look nervous. Good, if they see their Jonin sensei squirming like this, it will make them think twice in the future, Hiruzen thought with a hidden smile. We thought it would smooth over any remaining amnesty between us and Zabuza. Granted, he wanted a larger cut of the spoils. As for the people of Wave, the genjutsu mistress trailed off. Shursui picked up for her. The people there needed a leg after what Gato had done to their country, he said. With that and the newly built bridge bringing in trade, the country should be able to recover fully. Hiruzen, that had brought up another issue. Speaking of, he said. It is clear, however well-intentioned he was, the client Tazuna purposely misfiled the mission report and put our genin in danger. Shursui, since you are the senior jonin here, what do you propose we do about it? He saw the genin in the room tense up. One of them, Kiba, opened his mouth to say something. His sensei stopped him by placing a hand on his shoulder. He looked back at her as she gave him a pointed shake of her head. Kiba looked back at the Hokage, keeping quiet. Hiruzen gave Kurenai a subtle approving nod. Shursui pulled a scroll out after seeing the interaction playing out. I have proposed an outline right here, Hokage-sama, he said. He walked up to Hiruzen's desk and placed the scroll down. Shursui stepped away as Hiruzen picked up the scroll and opened it to read. After a minute, Hiruzen nodded and rolled the scroll up. I believe I can get the council to accept this, he said. Shursui bowed. Thank you, Hokage-sama, he said. Now then, he looked at Haku. Finally, because of Naruto's infamous, he picked up a sheet of paper and scrutinized it. Talk no Jutsu, Zabuza, the demon of the bloody mist, was convinced to let his partner/apprentice join Konoha while he returns to Kiri. Is that also correct? Naruto was scratching his head nervously. Is talk no jutsu really a thing? The others in the room stared at the blonde-haired boy. With you, Naruto, it's probably a kenjutsu, Sasuke commented, getting nods from the others. Hiruzen wanted to point out that it was a trait he had inherited from his father. But that was something that would come later when he learned about the identity of his father. Getting back on track. Which now brings us to the present. You have brought a foreign shinobi inside the walls of our village. A shinobi once in the service of Zabuza, formerly of Kiri. A hidden village whom we do not have any formal relations with at present. Did I miss anything here? He looked around the room. The genin, the jonin, and the young woman looked at each other, shrugging their shoulders. I think that sums it up, Naruto said with a cheeky smile. Sarutobi took a deep breath and exhaled. He wished he had a bottle of aspirin on him now. Okay, he said with a grandfatherly smile. I'll get to work on the paperwork. Yuki-san, until all the formalities are done, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to stay here. The young woman looked confused for a second. You're willing to take me in? She asked. Even knowing what you do about me? Hiruzen nodded. If my shinobi are willing to vow for you, then I am willing to trust them on this, he said. Though we will still have to go through the procedure, which included a few sessions with a Yamanaka mind reader, Hiruzen was thinking of getting Inochi to carry them out. Until then, you will have to stay here. You won't be allowed to tour the village, he noticed the genin tensed up. Hiruzen quickly cut off any arguments from them. At least not without an escort to accompany you. The 6 genin in the room relaxed. Gigi, Naruto said. If you don't mind. Can we show Haku around the village? We can act as her escorts, make sure she doesn't get up to anything. Judging by the expression on Naruto's face, he doubted that the young woman would try anything. Hiruzen was of the same mindset. I will permit it, he said with a wave of his hand. Is there anything else that needs to be addressed before I dismiss you? To his surprise, Hinata stepped up. Hokage-sama, if I may? She asked. Intrigued, Hiruzen gestured for the girl to continue. I request that Haku be allowed to stay at the Hyuga compound instead of being held here as a guest. Hiruzen raised an eyebrow. Now, there was an idea. He looked at the 2 jonin in the room to see how they were taking the request. As expected, Shisui and Kurenai appeared to be surprised by Hinata's request. However, Shisui had the beginnings of a smile on his face. He glanced at the young Hyuga. An interesting proposition, he said, putting his pipe down and locking his fingers together. Can you give me any reason why a stranger, a shinobi less than one that had been in the employ of Zabuza, should be allowed to stay at the Hyuga compound instead of being held here in the Hokage tower? Hinata looked nervous as all eyes turned on her. After a moment, the young genin took a deep breath. If you are worried about security matters, she started. Then you have nothing to fear. She will be under the eyes of the Hyuga, who possess the Byakugan. The all-seeing eye. She will not be able to escape our notice. Furthermore, by letting Haku stay at the Hyuga compound, she will stay with Naruto and me. We have already established a friendship with her. So, I feel Haku might feel more at ease staying with us than here in the tower. Hiruzen nodded and looked at the 2 jonin present. What do you 2 think? He asked. Kurenai had her arms crossed. It's not a bad idea, Hokage-sama, she said. At the moment, Haku is a guest in this village. So, it might be more productive to have her stay with one of the most prominent clans in the village. Shisui adds his opinion to the conversation. And my student does have a point about the Byakugan, he said. While I have no doubt Haku is a very skilled kunoichi, I doubt she could avoid the watchful eyes of the Hyuga clan. Even if she wanted to. Hiruzen nodded, taking in the insights offered by his shinobi. What about you, Haku-san, he said, directing his attention to the subject of the conversation. What do you think? Would you rather stay here in the Hokage tower? I assure you that you will be treated as a guest to the village. Or would you like to stay as a guest at the Hyuga compound? Now, all eyes were on the newcomer to the village, seeing her response. I do not mind either way, Hokage-sama, Haku said. I am honored that you would let me inside your village. I am also grateful you are considering taking me in despite my history. Regardless of where you put me, I do not care if it's here or elsewhere. However, I do not mind if I had a chance to stay with a friend. Hiruzen nodded. Very well then, he said. If the Hyuga clan agrees, Yuki Haku will stay at the Hyuga compound. The genin in the room cheered at the small victory they got. Don't worry, Haku, Naruto said. Hinata's dad is the head of the clan. I know he'll accept the offer to take you in. Haku nodded and bowed to the Hokage. Regardless of what happens, I'm honored to be heard, she said. I'm looking forward to learning more about your home. Hiruzen smiled at the young woman. If all goes well, it will be your home, too, he said. He didn't anticipate any difficulty in letting Haku stay in the village. He knew the council would jump at the chance to have a new Kekkei Genkai in Konoha, so dealing with them would not be difficult. He did, however, anticipate some trouble from his old friend Danzo. Now if that is everything, Hiruzen said. I would like to congratulate the members of Teams 8 and 11 for successfully completing their missions. I know this was a Harrowing experience for all of you. Particularly for Team 8, it is not often that C rank becomes a B rank mission. But such is the life of a shinobi, and I am pleased to know that you survived the experience. I will see to it that all of you will receive the appropriate payment for your service, he said. He wasn't looking forward to the paperwork he would have to do. But the smiles on the faces of the genin made the coming experience worth it. Teams 8 and 11, you are dismissed for the day, he said. Kurenai-san, can you stay for a moment? There are some things I wish to discuss with you. Kurenai gave him a nervous smile. Outside the Hokage tower, Haku was in awe of the village she was walking through. Zabuza and she had been to large villages before, it was rare, but none seemed to compare to what she saw. She had read about the hidden villages, so she knew a little about what Konoha was like and what to expect. She knew Konoha was one of the largest and most populous of the Great Five, but she had never been able to put an image of it. Now she did, and it was more than she could have imagined. In some ways, it was easier to picture it as a city than one of the Great Five hidden villages. There were so many people milling about in the streets and roads. In some ways, it was like being caught up in a river. Haku felt overwhelmed. She heard a chuckle coming from beside her. She looked over to see Naruto smiling at her. Impressed, aren't we? He asked. Haku nodded numbly as he looked at all the people and buildings around the group. There are so many people around, she said. Is this really a hidden village? Sure is, Naruto said. I know it's not what you would expect from a hidden village. In some ways, Konoha is more like a city. Albeit on the small side. Haku raised an eyebrow. On the small side. There are bigger places? She questioned me without thought. Sasuke answered with a nod. Try seeing the capital city of Fire Country, he said. Believe me, it makes Konoha look like a village. Haku tried to picture it. She took what she saw of Konoha and tried to make something bigger and more populous. She couldn't. I'll have to take your word for it, she said. Don't worry, Haku-san, Hinata said. The people here are good and friendly. You won't have to worry about them. Looking around, Haku saw that the Hyuga was right. Most people they passed by appeared more content to mind their own business. The ones that did pay the group any mind gave them a friendly smile and a nod of their head. However, she did notice the odd glare. Trust me, Konoha is a great place to live, Naruto said, walking forward with his hands behind his head. And I can't wait to show you all my favorite places. Speaking of, Sasuke said. Where should we go first? It was at that precise moment that a low growling was heard. Haku felt her cheeks heating up as the others turned their attention towards her. Haku scratched her cheek at the curious stares she got from the three. Maybe something to eat? She suggested. For a short while, the three genin of Team 11 stared at her. Then, a wide grin broke out across Naruto's face. I know just the place. Ichiraka ramen. Hey, old man, Naruto said as he took a seat. One miso ramen and keep them coming. The owner of the ramen stands turned to face the source of the voice. A gentle smile spread across the older man's face. Naruto, he said in a happy tone. It's so good to see you again. I was beginning to think that you would never show up again. Naruto smiled back at the older man. Had another C rank, he said. It took me and friends out of the village for a while. But you know me, the first thing I want to eat after getting back is the food of the gods. The ramen stand owner nodded. Then I better get to work, he said. You alone keep my business going. Next to him, a young woman appeared with a ladle in her hands. She smiled when she saw Naruto. Naruto-kun, she said. When did you get here? Just now, Naruto said. My team and I just got back from a mission. And look, he gestured to Haku. We brought a friend. Haku meekly waved to the pair. Hi, she said. I'm Yuki Haku. It's a pleasure to meet you. The older man chuckled. And she's a polite thing, too, he said. Reminds me of Hinata here. Hinata blushed and nodded. The stand owner smiled and looked back at Haku. So, you're a friend of Naruto and his team? Haku nodded. Yes, she answered. We met during their mission. Haku paused, wondering if it was appropriate to tell the circumstances they had met. The stand owner seemed to notice the fact that there was a story behind the first meeting between herself and Team 11. Well, any friend of Naruto is welcome here, he said. He is our best customer. I'm Tucci, and this is my daughter Ayam. The young woman next to him bowed to Haku. A pleasure to meet you, she said with a smile. Like my father said, you're welcome to eat here any time you want. It's the least we owe Naruto for bringing us so much business. Haku nodded as she picked up a menu. I will keep that in mind, she said. It was a little weird to Haku. Thus far, everyone in Konoha had been friendly to her, and none knew who she was. It was odd but not an unwelcome feeling. Trust me, Haku, this place serves some of the best ramen in the world, Naruto said, taking Haku out of her thoughts. Just try it. Believe me, you'll thank me for it. Haku looked at the other members of Team 11. Don't pay him any mind, Sasuke said with a smile. He's been a ramen addict since birth. Whenever he gets any of the stuff, he'll go soft in the knees and head. Naruto shot the Uchiha boy with a sharp glare. Careful with your blasphemous ways, he said. You already insult the gods of ramen with your love for tomatoes. Sasuke grinned as he looked at Naruto. You know, just for that, I'll order my bowl with an extra helping of tomatoes, he said. Heretic. Naruto pointed an accusing finger. Haku and Hinata shared a glance for a second, and then both females broke out into giggles. Now, boys, Tucci said in a stern voice, but a smile was present on his face. There is plenty of room for discussion here. Now then, would anyone else like to make an order? Haku looked through the menu carefully before she made her decision. I'll have the shrimp ramen, she said, putting her menu down. Hinata also put her menu down on the counter. I'll have the same thing, she said. I'll take the pork, Sasuke said. Then he sent a sideways glance at Naruto. With extra tomatoes. Blasphemy, Naruto muttered. Tucci chuckled. So that's 1 miso, 2 shrimps, and 1 pork with extra tomatoes, he said. He got nods from the 4. All right then, we'll have that right out for you. Once the pair of father and daughter had gone to their work, Naruto turned to face Haku. So, Haku, what do you think of Konoha? He asked. It's nice, Haku said. It's different from the other places Zabuza and I have been to before. Naruto nodded. It's a great place to live, he said. He started to gesture to the ramen stand where the group was eating. For one, it's got Ichiraku ramen, that alone would make it the greatest village in the elemental nations. Sasuke rolled his eyes. I swear if you ever become Hokage, the first thing you will do is declare ramen as the village food of Konoha, he said. If? Naruto said in mock surprise. Don't you mean when? He pointed to the mountain that overlooked the village and the 4 faces carved into it. One day, my face will be on that mountain. Haku looked up at what the village called the Hokage monument. She had read about the 4 faces carved into the mountainside and how it was one of the great man-made wonders of the modern world. But seeing it for herself was something else entirely. It also changed her perception of the monument. It's something, isn't it? Haku heard Hinata say. Haku looked at the young girl. She was putting her fingers together. It's like the Hokage are always watching over us, protecting us. Even if 3 of them are gone, it feels like they are still with us. Haku nodded and looked back up at the four faces watching the village. She had thought the monument had been some vanity project for the leaders of Konoha, a means to show their power. Now, looking at Konoha with her eyes, it felt like they were watching over their village, even when they were no longer in the land of the living. For the first time in Haku's life, she felt she had found somewhere she could feel safe. If only Zabuza were here. He might have felt the same thing. Then she shook her head, pushing the thought aside. Haku, Hinata said, getting Haku's attention. Haku was thankful for the timely distraction. Yes, Hinata-san? She asked. You want to ask something? Hinata nodded. You said that you and Zabuza have been to lots of places before, right? She asked. Haku nodded. We have, she answered. We were always on the move, hunting down new missions to take and trying to avoid Hunter Nin, other shinobi, and bounty hunters. We could never stay in place for too long. Naruto and Sasuke listened to the conversation. Sounds tough, Sasuke said. Haku nodded. It was, she admitted. So, we never really got to know the place. Most times, we wouldn't even stay in a town or village for more than a day. Truth be told, most of the places she had been started to blur together a long time ago. A shame. She would have loved to have gotten to know some places she had been to and the people that lived there. Were there any places that stuck out? Hinata asked. The two of you traveled a lot, so someplace must have stuck out to you. Like a particular town or nation, maybe mountain or forest. Haku pondered the question for a second. She tried to recall any place or site that stuck out to her. There are a few places, she said. Like the land of spring and the land of iron. Land of iron? Sasuke asked. Where the samurai are? Did you meet any? Haku nodded. Zabuza and I had a mission there, she explained. A simple spy mission to uncover secrets of a local lord. As for meeting a samurai, we avoided making contact. Shinobi aren't exactly welcomed in the land of iron, least of all Nuke Nin. Sasuke nodded. I hear that samurai are supposed to be master swordsmen. He said. Supposedly, even the average samurai can best a jonin-level swordsman. Zabuza had told her something similar. I think that might be an exaggeration, she said. Though Zabuza did say to be careful when fighting a samurai in a sword fight. Sasuke nodded. I wouldn't mind meeting one, he said. I've been learning kenjutsu from my brother and sensei. I want to see how well I stack up against a samurai. Now Sasuke had Haku's attention. You're learning to use a sword? Haku asked. She got a nod from the Uchiha boy. Maybe you can show me sometime. I might even be able to offer you a tip or two. Sasuke looked at her questioningly. You know something about kenjutsu? Then he smacked his head on the counter. Of course, Zabuza. Haku giggled. It might not be my field of specialization, she said. But being the partner of a former member of the Seven Swordsmen of the Mist, you pick up a thing or two. Sasuke picked his head up and nodded at her. Maybe I can show you tomorrow, he said. It would be interesting to hear what you have to say. Tomorrow it is, Haku said. Assuming your village leader will let me. The bowls of ramen were placed on the counter. For steaming hot bowls of ramen, the stand owner said with a broad smile. A miso for our favorite customer with more to come. One pork ramen with extra tomatoes for the resident heretic, Sasuke snorted at the joke from the man. A shrimp ramen for each of the lovely ladies. He got nods from the two females. Please enjoy and let me know if you need anything. Haku nodded and looked at her bowl of ramen. She would admit it looked delicious. Thank you, she said to the owner/chief of the stand. The man nodded and turned his attention to another customer. All right, let's dig in, Naruto said. He picked up a pair of chopsticks and broke them apart. You think you can tell us more about the places you've been to? Hinata asked as she picked up a pair of chopsticks. I would like to know about the world outside of Konoha. Haku nodded and began to tell the three genin about the stories she had of her and Zabuza's travels across the elemental nations. Hyuga compound. Haku was nervous. The group had finished their meal at Ichiraku, which had been very good, to Haku's surprise. Haku hadn't thought much of ramen, only that it was a quick and easy dish to make and often very cheap. It surprised her that something so simple could be so good. She could see why Naruto liked the place so much. Speaking of a certain blindfolded blonde, she got her second surprise from him at that stand. Namely, how many bowls the boy could put away. Any thoughts of paying for the food had died when she saw the 12 bowls of ramen stacked neatly by Naruto's side, with a 13th being whirled on the Uzumaki. His teammates had looked at her with amused expressions as she took the sight in. Where was all that ramen going? That was a question she was still pondering but, for the moment, had set aside in favor of her rising nervousness. She was heading for the home of her friends. Her friends' home. Her friends. Haku never had any friends in her life. She had always dreamed of having a friend. However, between her life in Kiri and her travels with Zabuza, it has been a dream. Now, though, she had a friend in Naruto. More than that, she had friends with his teammates Hinata and Sasuke. It was more than she had ever dreamed about, and now she was going over to their home, possibly to stay there for a night or longer. Haku felt her cheeks burning up at the very thought. It did not help that her friend's home was also the home of a major clan. Haku would have to be on her best behavior to make a good impression. Don't worry, Haku, Naruto said. Haku was taken from her thoughts, and she looked at the boy. With a few exceptions, he looked at Hinata. The Hyuga might be a bunch of sticks in the mud, but they're not bad people. You don't have to be nervous. Haku nodded. You think they'll let me stay? She asked. She knew a little bit about the Hyuga clan, and it made her nervous. Hinata answered. They will, she said. My father will see to it. He's a good man. So had Haku's father, but she kept that to herself. Is there anything I should do? She asked. I know the Hyuga are a major clan in Konoha. But I am unsure if there is anything special I need to do if I'm going to be around them. Hinata shook her head. Nothing like that, she said. Just be yourself and be polite. Haku nodded and looked forward to seeing that the trio was coming up to the gates to the Hyuga compound. 2 guards were standing by the gates. The 2 men took notice of the approaching group and stood at attention. Hinata-sama, one said with a bow, his partner reflecting the same action. It is good to see you again. We had heard you and your team had returned from a mission. Hinata nodded. We did, she said. Naruto and I have returned so we can make our report to the Elder Council. She then gestured to Haku. And we have brought a guest. Both guards nodded. Yes, we understand, the other said. We were informed that you would be bringing a guest. Hinata nodded. Then my father was told? Hinata asked, getting nods from the guards. Has a decision been made? For that, you will have to meet with the council, another voice said. A man walked into view. He was dressed in traditional Hyuga robes and had a sash covering his forehead. Both guards recognized the man and gave him a respectful bow. Hizashi-sama, both intoned. The man named Hizashi gestured for the guards to rise. He then looked at the trio and smiled. Hinata, Naruto, it's good to see both of you back, he said. I can only assume that your mission was a success. Hinata nodded. It was, uncle, Hinata said. Haku's eyes widened as she glanced between the older Hyuga man and Hinata. Is he really her uncle? She asked Naruto. Naruto nodded. That's right, he said. Hisashi Hinata's uncle. He's a really nice guy. The boy then muttered something under his breath about someone named Niji. So, that would make him the brother of her father? Haku asked. She didn't think she would meet someone so high up in the clan this soon. Twin in fact, Naruto pointed out. You'll see in a moment. Haku nodded and turned her attention to the conversation between Hinata and her uncle. She would have if the latter weren't staring at her with an expectant look. Haku felt her cheeks flush once she realized the man was expecting a response from her. Haku quickly gave the man a respectful bow. My apologies, Hisashi-sama, she said. I was not paying attention. Can you repeat your question? The man chuckled and waved her off. No need for formalities, Yuki-san, he said. My brother is the one that leads the Hyuga clan, so there is no need to address me so formally. Haku was still nervous. I understand, Hisashi-san, she said. It seemed a little disrespectful to address him like that. The man nodded. I can see why you and Naruto have taken a liking to her, he said to his niece. She is a polite person. I am sure the elders will like that. Hinata was pressing her fingers together. Has the council reached a decision? She asked. Hisashi nodded. They have, he said. Come, I'll take you to them. They have already assembled. Inside the Hyuga compound, Elder Council chambers, we expect you to be on your best behavior while you stay here, a member of the Hyuga Elder Council said. You are our guest here, as such, we expect you to act as any guest should before their host. Of course, Elder-san, Haku said. I will endeavor to be a gracious guest while staying here. The elders of the council looked at each other, giving approving nods. Their spokesperson looked at her. Then we of the huge Elder Council welcome you to our home. If there is anything you need, do not hesitate to ask. As hosts, it is our duty and privilege to care for those in our care. Haku bowed to show her respect for the elders of the Hyuga clan. I thank you for this honor, Elder-san. I assure you that I will not be a bother for the duration of my stay. Once my living arrangements have been taken care of, I will leave so I will not be a burden to you. The elders nodded at her. From the corner of her eye, it showed that Naruto was smiling at her, and Hinata gave an approving nod. She continued to stare at the elders of the clan. No need to hurry, the spokesperson said with a dismissive wave of his hand. We only hope that in the future, you will be able to repay our kindness. He then looked at the head of the Hyuga clan, a man named Hayashi and Hinata's father. The man nodded and cleared his throat. In the meantime, one of our clansmen will be assigned as your minder. Sarah-san, you may come in, he said. Haku heard the doors behind her sliding opening mixed in with the surprised gasp from Naruto. A moment later, a woman walked into Haku's field of vision. The woman bowed to the clan head and the elders. Hayashi-same, esteemed elders, she said politely. You honor me with your summons. I am to understand that I am the minder for an honored guest of our clan? Hayashi nodded. Indeed, you will, he said. Haku-san, this Sarah Hyuga, an up-and-coming chunin in the ranks and soon to be jonin. Haku greeted the woman with a bow. Greetings, Sarah-san, she said. It is a pleasure to meet you. Sarah nodded at her and smiled. The pleasure is mine, she said. Any friend of Naruto-kun is good in my books. Haku raised an eyebrow, and she looked between the woman and Naruto. You know Naruto-kun? She asked. A surprised look spreads across the woman's face. I see, she said, shooting Naruto a sharp look. The boy flinched and started to whistle. She looked back at Haku with an amused smile. Well, of course, I should know who he is. I practically raised him for the past 8 years. I'm his caretaker, of course, and days with him being a genin now, I don't have to fill that role as much. Haku nodded her understanding. Then I know I will be in good hands, she said. Sarah nodded, and both Kunoichi looked at Hayashi and the elders. Sarah-san, when Haku-san is present in the compound and you are not on missions, you will attend to her needs, he said. Is that understood? Haku-san is an honored guest of our clan. Do you understand the importance of this assignment? Sarah bowed to the clan head. I do, Hayashi-sama, she said. Hayashi nodded. Then, if there is nothing else to discuss, he said. Noro, Haku, and Sarah, you may leave now. Sarah, please show Haku-san where she will be staying. Hinata, if you would, the council wishes to speak to you. From the corner of her eye, Haku saw a tight frown on Naruto's lips. Hinata's reassuring smile kept him from saying anything. Hinata looked at her father and nodded. Haku gave one last bow to the council and the head of the Hyuga clan. Then she, Naruto, and Sarah left the chambers. When the doors slid shut behind her, Haku let out a breath she did not know she was holding. She had acted similarly around clients before or nobles and lords who had allowed Zabuza to pass through their lands. They had always been tiring, and this had been no exception. Yeah, I always feel like after dealing with those prune faces, Naruto said. Haku looked at him, he was giving her a bright smile. It's like those guys just suck the life right out of you. It must be what's keeping those fossils alive, that or the sticks up their asses. Naruto. Sarah scolded the boy. What have I told you about addressing the elders of our clan? Naruto didn't look all that impressed by his caretaker's scolding. Oh, I meant the most honorable and venerable elders, he said. He looked like he had just swallowed something sour. Whose wisdom has gilded this clan for generations? Blue, Sarah, you know I'm telling the truth here. Those old prunes are just a bunch of life-sucking leeches. Sarah's eyes narrowed at the young genin. You should still show more respect, she said. Haku noticed that the woman didn't comment on Naruto's other statements. Haku chuckled as the scene between the two played out. This got the attention of both Uzumaki and Hyuga. The latter of which straightened her robes out and cleared her throat. Please don't pay this little gaki any mind, she said. He means well, but I'm afraid I have failed to pass on the concept of manners to him. Naruto's mouth twists into a cheeky smile. Oh, I have manners, he said. I just don't choose to use them around certain people. Sarah looked at the boy with a smile that wasn't anything but friendly. Is that so? She asked. If I may ask, am I included in that certain people? Naruto's smile grew to become like a fox's. Can't say, he replied, his hands went behind his head. Sarah's eyes narrowed at the Uzumaki boy. And why not? She asked. It's a simple question to answer. A shinobi is entitled to his secrets, isn't he? Naruto shot back. Sarah kept her eyes narrowed at the boy. Then she sighed and looked at Haku. Please forgive Naruto, she said. He is a good kid, but he can forget his manners. Haku chuckled at the look Naruto shot the woman. Don't worry about it, she said. He has been nothing but kind to me since we met. He is quite the boy. A smile graced Sarah's lip. If Haku had not been mistaken, she would have described it as being proud. Well, he can still learn some manners, she said. She crossed her arms. And made a point not to look at Naruto, but the smile never left. That said, Haku spoke as her memories returned to her first meeting with Naruto. I think he did mention you once as his caretaker. Really now? Sarah said, giving Naruto an examining look. The boy had a nervous smile on his face. Pray, tell what he had to say about me. Naruto looked at Haku with a pleading expression. Haku smiled. All good things, I assure you, she said. Sarah looked at Naruto with a raised eyebrow. The boy acted like it was nothing. Sarah cracked a small smile. Well, I would hope so, she said. Come on, I'll show you where you will be staying. Haku looked out the window of what would be her home for the foreseeable future, the night sky hanging over Konoha. She let out her breath and closed the window, preparing for a night's sleep. Her first day in Konoha was interesting. It was not quite what she had imagined, not necessarily in a bad way, but still not what she had expected. A part of it, she supposed, was because Zabuza was not here with her. So, much of her life had revolved around her master. By all intents and purposes, Zabuza had raised her. She had eaten meals with him, slept under the same stars as him, and in the same room. She had been trained by the former swordsman of the Mist Member for as long as she could remember. Haku had dedicated her entire life to Zabuza, and he was the only thing that gave her direction. Now, she lacked that direction for the first time in her life. Zabuza was not here. The reality of it had never set in until now. The thoughts she had been pushing to the back of her mind came to the forefront in full force. What was she going to do without her master at her side? How could she live without him? What was her purpose now? These thoughts would plague her for the rest of the night. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to share this video with your friends. Guys, make sure to help the author by visiting the link in the description. This is Fox Sage, and I'm signing off.